Test. Testing.
Good evening. It's 6 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get this meeting called to order. This is a regular meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council. This is for August the 17th, 2021. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if you'll please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Council members: Judith Chandler. Present. John Shada. Julie Wolf. Natalie Johnson. Here. Steve Brimner,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune,
Present.
and Mayor John Graham.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone is here? Great. So next item is approval of the agenda. I think everybody's had a chance to look it over. Would entertain a motion to approve.
I move we approve the agenda.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Mr. Bremner. All in favor say aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. On to public comment on non-agenda items. And see, we had an email communication from Mike Graham, but it's actually about COVID, which is on the agenda, so we would entertain that at a different part of the meeting, and I see that he's not here. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak? Mr. Todd, you had submitted something last week, and we didn't get to it because it was a work session. I didn't know if you wanted to bring that back? Not this time. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to a non-agenda item? And Judy, did we have anyone else who contacted us? Okay. All right. There appearing to be no public comment. Let's move on. So we have 3 items on our consent calendar. The first is Volunteer Firefighters Pension Board Report, which is due by the end of the month, to be presented to us by the end of the month. The second item is approval of the August 3rd, 2021 regular meeting minutes. And the third is resolution number 1121, a resolution of the City of Manitou Springs, Colorado, approving an intergovernmental agreement between the El Paso County Clerk and Recorder and the City of Manitou Springs regarding conducting a coordinated election. I would entertain a motion to accept and approve, if there are no objections. Mayor Pro Tem?
I move we approve the consent calendar with the exception of the minutes. On page 8, it says that Councilor Chandler introduced the idea of a measure to allow non-citizens to vote, and that was actually Councilor Johnson.
Okay,
And
good.
thank you for bringing it.
Thank you. So then we do have an objection to the regular meeting minutes, which we'll entertain as a separate item. If there are no other objections with entertaining consent calendar that takes the Fireman's Pension Board and the resolution together, I would look for a motion to accept and approve those 2 items.
Also move.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Chandler. Motion by Councilor Wolf. All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Okay. On to the regular meeting minutes then. Mayor Pro Tem, you had brought up the item. I don't know if you want to speak to greater detail, but you have the floor.
I move we approve the minutes of, what was the date, Jude?
August 3rd.
August 3rd, after changes made to change that, it was Councilor Chandler that introduced the measure of allowing others to vote in local elections, specifically non-citizens, and it was actually Councilor Johnson.
Thank you.
Second.
You have a second? Okay, any discussion? If not, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, on to hearings. Item G1, it's a Planning Commission recommendation for a major conditional use permit, 2103, major conditional use permit, mobile food vending at 306 Manitou Avenue. Gabriel Piper of Treehouse Coffee applicant on behalf of Mr. Singh, the owner. Thank you. And Michelle, you have the floor. And so if you would both introduce yourselves, the gentleman, if you'd give us your address.
Mayor, just for the record, this typically is when you open the actual public hearing, and this is all part of the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's good to have adult supervision. I appreciate that. So I will open the public hearing.
Thank you. This is Michelle Anthony, Senior Planner.
I'm Gabriel Pieper, and my address is 110 South Path, Manitou Springs.
So Mr. Pieper is proposing a drive-up coffee vending service at 306 Manitou Avenue. It was approved unanimously, or recommended for approval unanimously at the last Planning Commission meeting, and a motion was sent to City Council. The first item that was a condition of approval that you'll see in the notice of recommendation was that Mr. Pieper would provide a revised site plan and some signing information That was provided to staff. I do have copies of the site plan. I didn't get a chance to email him today. I had a problem printing off the sign information, but we did get it, and I'll work with him to make sure that we can print it off and that it gets reviewed for acceptability. So I have copies of the site plan if anybody wants them, but I can confirm that we have received that. So he has complied, as far as staff is concerned, complied with condition number 1.
Thank you. Michelle, do you have more? Do you want to?
That's just, the recommendation is to approve per the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pieper, do you have comments?
I'd just like to thank the council for its consideration and let you know that I'm very excited to bring our brand of coffee and donuts here to town. I'm excited to be the first drive-through food service place in Manitou history. So, thank you.
Thank you. Council, does anyone have questions for Mr. Pieper or Michelle at this time? Judith?
Thank you. So it's a grease trap question. So with the conditional use, and I know that there have been at least one business before that has used a garden hose that is hooked up at the adjacent property, which is the liquor store. And it's my understanding that the bathrooms will be accessible. Will a grease trap be placed in the liquor store property or the coffee shop property?
I can get that one. They will need to place a below sink grease trap in the liquor store property. The water line, the water hose that was hooked up by a previous user of that small building, that was not a compliant water or sewer connection, and which is one reason that Mr. Pieper has gone through this process for a conditional use instead of it being an administrative sign-off on his business license. So we're treating it kind of like a food truck because it doesn't have the utilities. Our hope is, and Mr. Pieper had expressed this as well, once he's up and he's operating and he will have invested a pretty good amount, he's hoping his property owners will then invest in some water and sewer lines for him. But to get him going and be able to operate, we're treating it like a mobile vending. So he is going to be using the liquor store as his commissary, what the health department calls his commissary, and that's where he'll be getting potable water and disposing of non-potable water or sanitary disposal.
And I saw that the Department of Health did sign off on that, so that is not an uncommon
No,
practice.
No.
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Any other questions this time? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. First, I would like to see the new site plan because I couldn't figure out from the packet how people would, where the walk-up window was or how people would get to the courtyard to sit down. I think that was the plan. So, but while you're bringing that up, I also have a couple of other questions. I know it's mentioned about, thank you, wildlife-resistant trash containers, but it's not explicit in the conditions. And I do worry, we all know that the subway has historically been a buffet for bears in the area. So is that something that would be acceptable to make a condition, is that they must be wildlife-resistant trash containers and recyclable containers?
Absolutely, yeah. The trash and recycle receptacles in the outside eating area will be similar to what the city has around town at the parks and such. And we would work with the trash company to get the most animal-proof dumpster or trash can to make sure that that's not an issue.
Okay, and Michelle, is that something that could be a condition? Or
Absolutely.
is that overkill?
No, I mean, that's entirely council's purview.
us,
If you want to add
okay.
it, that's no problem.
Thank you. Another question that I had is the closure of the entrance that Public Works has historically used. So it's just kind of seems to be a wishy-washy statement in there that a condition number 2 says that they'll coordinate with Public Works. But I just want to ensure that Public Works will continue to have access somehow across that property. I don't know exactly what that agreement is at this point, but
So right now, the city has historically accessed across that private property, and we don't have an easement or any kind of formal agreement. So with the closure of that access, and that there was really no choice, according to CDOT, it probably should have been done when Subway was put in. Then the reason it says to work with Public Services is, I did talk to Public Services about would they be willing to actually move our access into the park, farther east. There's a pretty easy way to do that. They looked at that and said, yeah, there's an easy area where it's not going to take a whole lot of work or anything. But I've made it clear to Mr. Pieper that the city's not automatically saying that we're responsible for that. So that is something that he's going to have to work with Public Services on to make sure that they will either pay for it or work with him on paying for it so that we continue to have access through there.
okay.
Or not through there, we continue to have access from Manitou Avenue. But it would be via our own property instead of through the Subway property. Because
Okay.
it has caused, there have been some issues where we've gotten blocked in or blocked out, and it makes it hard for Subway with cars there.
So that's a historic concern that would need to be resolved regardless.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Other counselors? Well, I guess I'd like to pick up on the Mayor Pro Tem's theme, and I guess my concern is with the city, we'll need access to the swimming pool area, both, in the case of emergency equipment, we need to be able to respond and get vehicles right up next to the pool, and by the same token, we need to be able to get fairly heavy construction vehicles in there for maintenance, and I think we're probably looking at maintenance here in the next few years, serious maintenance. So I would want to be sure that the city's covered on that. I don't want to see the driveway go away and a bunch of little plants come up and we're not able to get an ambulance in there. Has that been discussed in greater detail, Michelle?
I did have Public Works look at it to make sure that they were comfortable with a location that was going to be a sufficient distance, into our property. And they agreed that there was a very easy, basically just you'd put a driveway in and it would connect at a certain point to the existing driveway. It would just not angle in from this property. And Mr. Pieper understands that, we've made no promises that the city will pay for that, but it will have to be coordinated and our access will have to be maintained, either relocated or there's an issue with closing that one location off of Manitou Avenue.
And has the fire department weighed in on this?
The fire department hasn't. Like I said, I talked to Public Services, and from my looking at it and their looking at it, I don't think it's a sufficient difference that the fire department's going to have any problem with it. It's still going to be fairly flat. There's a couple of trees that'll go right in between that have plenty of clearance, and it'll just hook up with that existing driveway and off of Manitou Avenue. So it shouldn't be a big issue.
You can actually still access it through the parking lot, going around the building. It would just, what I would do is just put a sidewalk where the driveway is, and not much beyond that. So if it was an emergency between me doing that and if they needed access to that, they can still have access to the existing driveway.
Yeah, there's no barrier that would go up at this point. The idea, though, would be that we would get our access off of the private property. Ultimately, that's the solution.
Okay, but I guess my question is, could you get a fire truck in
Absolutely.
without having to call people to make some sort of arrangements? No.
Absolutely. There wouldn't be any problem with that.
All right. Council, I'm sorry, yes, Julie?
Maybe this is a question for Jeff. I don't know if number 2 in the motion really protects the city. Since Michelle indicated that that paragraph is supposed to indicate that the city makes no promises to spend any money to ensure ongoing access. for city vehicles. Shouldn't that be spelled out?
Yeah, it would be helpful to have a little more detail in there.
Yeah, I'm concerned that's so vague. I mean, it's just one sentence compared to a whole paragraph of, which really results in, we'll figure it out later. I'd feel more comfortable if it says any expenses incurred will not be borne by the city, or else if you haven't figured that out yet, come back when you do, and then we can vote on it.
My only hesitation with not being that specific was that Public Services didn't indicate that they were against paying for the improvement. They just didn't say that they would right at that point.
Yeah, that's why I wouldn't vote for this, because it's too vague. Because if we go ahead and we pass this, and there's a fight down the road about who should pay, there's nothing in our documentation answering the question. And it's our responsibility to do adequate documentation, so we're the ones that would suffer. That's why I'm not comfortable with it.
Thank you. Councilor Chandler?
Oh, so I'm going to go ahead and piggyback on to this discussion. And I'm looking at page 25 of 29, the conceptual site plan A2. I do have a concern with the way that you potentially are increasing the number of parking spaces. I think what I understand you're saying is there's a planter there where the emergency vehicles and public works typically access. So I'm not understanding. First of all, I'd like the fire department to give us their blessing that this could happen. That's a big deal. Emergency vehicles getting in there. But I would like to see a little bit more of a refinement on the site plan, because as I'm looking at it, there's that big planter that used to be that sign where the motel was. And I don't know where you're thinking of maybe cutting a driveway in there around that.
The area that I discussed with Public Services was east of that, and it's a little hard because the trees give you a lot of shadow line, but there's kind of a little clump of trees to the east of that planter, and there's an area between that and the next big clump of trees that would be kind of a perfect place to just run a driveway in there. It would come in directly off of Manitou Avenue, wouldn't interfere with anything, and it's almost at the very same, it's very close, within maybe a foot of the same grade of where it would connect with that angled driveway that cuts across this property. So it would be east of that planter.
The only issue I have with that is the current egress and ingress is that traffic light. And if a driveway is cut, a lot of times there's standing traffic there waiting for the light, and an emergency vehicle would have to engineer their way with oncoming traffic, because they wouldn't have the benefit of the traffic light there. So I guess I would like to explore the issue with Public Works and as Councilor Wolf suggested, and also I'd like a little bit more information on the driveway issue before I'm comfortable with voting for this.
Right.
Thank you. And we do need to have a public comment phase, so then we can come back to questions. If there's no objections with council, I'd like to go ahead and move into the public comment phase, see what other remarks we might have, and then we can come back and discuss this in more detail. Great. Michelle, Mr. Pieper, thank you. We'll probably have you back here in a little bit. So at this point, we're entertaining public comment. If there's any member of the public who would like to speak to this, this would be your opportunity. We'll ask you to come forward here in just a minute. The seats are vacated. Is there anyone who wants to speak to this? Probably not. Judy, did we have anyone contact us? Okay, anyone? No takers. Okay, well then I'll say the public comment's closed, and council, we can go in discussion mode. So, Judith, do you want to, you were talking about the driveway there, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, so what I would like to see happen, two things. One, I'd like to get a better understanding of the driveway And our relationship to who would pay for it needs to be clarified for me. And also, I would like to see the fire department take a look at it and give us their feedback on what they're thinking about the driveway and so on. And of course, I want to make sure that if a driveway did go through there, I go there I'm usually there every day, just to make sure that this plan doesn't mean that we're going to have to take out some more heritage trees to get a driveway in. So those are my concerns.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
I'm wondering if we can just tighten up the language on number 2 to say something like that closure of the Manitou Avenue access utilized by the city of Manitou Springs for maintenance of Shriver Park will remain open. I don't know how to say it. That will remain open, and if there is a requirement for additional driveway, it will be at no cost to the city. Or, because another way is they just ensure that there's never any obstacles to the fire department or maintenance crews through the existing parking lot. Even though it's private property. I don't know a way to say that, though.
Okay. Yeah, Michelle, maybe you can give us a little insight.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to add to that condition, basically what you were paraphrasing there, I'm trying to find my copy. And just note that the current access will remain as is through the private property. It doesn't mean you have to come in from Manitou Avenue on that one driveway. They can come in from the rest of the other access. And that at such time, if the access is relocated, that it'll be at no cost to the city. And I would only say unless public services or the city agrees to fund that, and a plan that is approved by the fire department and ensures that, no significant vegetation or trees would have to be removed. All those, I think, are completely doable.
Yeah, and I do want to say I'm very supportive of this initiative. Like Councilor Wolf, I'm just a little concerned about the loosey-goosey of number 2.
Sure.
Mr. Bremner?
I have to say that I'm confused. I don't know exactly where Shriver Park is, and I don't know where this driveway is.
Yeah, Michelle, do you have a map that might be helpful?
Sorry. I think the one that was being referred to previously, that's in the staff report, toward the end of the staff report, and I'm sorry, what, was that 25 of 29? So if you're looking at that and you see Manitou Avenue, Shriver Park is to the right-hand side of the site.
So it's on the right, is it in between the liquor store and the site, or is it on the other side of the liquor?
No, it's on the other side of Subway, actually. There's the drive up, you can see the little cars queuing up. There's the liquor store in the middle. There's Subway on the right-hand side of the site, and then Shriver Park is even to the right of that. And you can see the small planter, what used to be a planter, or is a planter where a sign used to be, that's at the corner of Shriver Park.
So that's not even near where that proposed site is. That's why I'm very confused.
Yeah, it's all one property. It's all owned under one ownership, and so CDOT requires that the access permit, for them to get the access permit for this additional commercial operation, 2 of the 3 driveways along this frontage have to be closed.
Oh, okay.
So that's why. And the one driveway, and we access Shriver Park, one of the accesses into Shriver Park kind of cuts across that corner of the property into the park.
Okay.
I might add that that access, the bridge there, that's the only one that'll support a big truck. And the other
Right.
bridge is pedestrian bridge. So if you're talking about getting construction materials in or doing heavy construction, that's the bridge that's the only choice we have.
Right.
So we need to protect our access there. Mr. Cheney?
Yeah, just the trucks for tree trimming are pretty big when we have to take care of those big trees in Shriver. And then you have the pond. And the pond, if we have to drain it and clean it out, requires several trucks. So just something to keep in mind.
Great, thank you. Other council comments? Okay, well, it seems like we're moving towards a kind of decision.
I can make a motion.
Yes, please.
I move to postpone this pending review of the fire department. And when we come back to look at it, to see if much more specific language can be used to replace paragraph 2 concerning costs.
Would you entertain a friendly amendment on that to include?
We need a second.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Okay, motion is second. Counselor Chandler, I guess you're.
I'm sorry, I jumped again there. I would like to add a schematic of what a driveway would look like. I think we need to take a look at that if one is cut over there near Shriver. I'd like to see how that would work.
I'm happy to amend my motion to include a request for a schematic of the proposed driveway.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional discussion?
And to see that the wildlife-resistant trash can, thank you, Nancy, is also included.
Okay, thank you. Do we have other council comments, concerns? Okay, let's, Julie, for our benefit, would you be so kind as to restate your motion?
I move to postpone, and I would request that this come back to us with a much more specific paragraph 2 conditions regarding cost obligations of the parties pertaining to a driveway or other access. Also to come back to us with a fire department review assessment and with a site plan or a schematic, whatever word you want to use, reflecting the proposed driveway access, and reflecting a requirement that only the wildlife-resistant trash cans be used at the property.
Thank you for restating that. So we have a motion and a second. I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously, so this item will be postponed pending those additional criteria. All right, thank you. Okay. Next item is presentation of the Housing Board Recommended Housing Habitability Code Draft and discussion of concept for rental housing licensing program. I believe we have Corrine Toll here and Michelle Anthony. Yes, please. And if you need to get really close to the microphone, like 3 or 4 inches from it.
Corrine Toll, 457 Crystal Hills Boulevard.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to introduce to you some members of the HAB who are present tonight, if you don't mind. Barb Bunn is here. And also, oh, sorry. And let's see. Andy Wells and Regina Di Padova. Those are board members that are present tonight. Well, I think this first slide is pretty self-explanatory. Are there any questions about that? I don't really choose to read it all for you. Seems like that would be unnecessary. So obviously the HAB is here because we've worked on both the habitability code and have already begun to examine a licensing and registration for rental units in Manitou Springs. So, but first here we're talking about the Housing Habitability Code draft. And as you can see on page 2, there are a number of references that we are operating under that have advised us to create a habitability code for this town. And it's been a long time coming, really. The housing, the background data that we have here it's from 2017 when we had a housing needs assessment update. Do you have any questions about those two slides? Yes.
Sure. Why do you believe the vacancy rate has increased throughout the years?
You know, it started with well, I don't know if there's still as much of a vacancy rate this year as there has been. But I can tell you that the vacancy rate did increase substantially after the floods of 2012. And, you know, some of the buildings really were designated inhabitable unless there was quite a lot of work done. So that was the main impetus. Is that what your understanding is, Michelle? Yeah, okay. It's not unusual for there to be a vacancy rate for towns. Okay, and as you can see by the article, How Was Housing Habitability Code Developed, we really did look at a lot of codes around the nation, in fact. And
I'm sorry, excuse me, can you go back to the previous slide, the one with the histograms?
Do you want to talk about that,
Well,
John?
Yeah, on that one here, okay, so the text on the right there, it's, we got nearly 40% of the units were built before 1940, okay. It's not a big surprise. But in looking over at the histogram, like take that first item, 1939 and earlier, we have 37% roughly. Manitou Springs, well, I was looking at, sorry, maybe I'm dense, but it looked to me like what we were saying is in 1939, 37% of the houses were built before 1940, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. So are these, is there some interpretation here that I'm not getting?
So what that's showing you is basically of the current housing stock, in 1939, almost 40% of the current housing stock had been built. So from the time, 1872 that Manitou started, up to 39 of our current housing stock, it's about 40%. Does that make sense?
Well, I think the graph could be a little more descriptive, but I don't think it's, okay, I'm willing to move on. Okay.
Well, of course, the gist of it is that we have a lot of old buildings, and I'm sure that doesn't come as a surprise to any of you. And also the fact that many of them have really not been maintained very well is obvious as you walk around. So, I just wanted to provide you with some data so that you had some background on this.
Corinne, can you stay really close because we're losing you whenever you turn your head?
I'm sorry, I'm just so unused to this. Thank you. Just keep reminding me. All right, so we looked at a lot of different codes and really wanted to personalize this to our particular town. And we've done that reasonably well. And what else is here? All right, so questions, do you have any questions specifically about the code itself? You have a copy of that, I presume, that the lawyers have the ordinance that has been reviewed and refined, actually, by the municipal legal staff. I think there's going to be another conversation with them. There are a few items that were removed that we might want to see about reinserting, but nothing significant at this time. And we'll have an opportunity to do that before you vote on this, so you'll have a chance to see it. Julie?
Oh, this is just a minor thing overall, but I think when we were revising the planning code earlier, some years back, we agreed the word family would not be used. We used household, and we talked about it for a long time, and yet family shows up here, so I don't think that is a good idea. And then household is defined, because family is a very loose thing. That's just one comment.
Okay.
Question, Julie, is that in the ordinance, or is that just the slides here?
It's in the definition section of the ordinance, and then I assume it's also in the ordinance itself, since they bothered to define it.
Okay, good,
Yeah,
thank you.
the word family, it's under definitions, which is,
It references an existing definition, so we could make those two changes to get to revise the existing definition as well as this one, so that's fine.
And also, we brought it up when we had our last zoning meeting a couple weeks ago. We brought it up there that the definitions need to be consistent between this and the zoning code as well.
that's right.
Same definition, yeah.
Yeah. Who is checking that with our contractors?
Yeah, that's actually something that we're working with the contractors on, and especially some of those definitions like family or household or things, the way that we refer to some things in the code, to kind of bring that up into more modern lingo, and then coordinate those. So that's on the front burner.
Okay, thank you.
And I do want to just make one comment, just so that it doesn't get lost in discussion. We currently have a housing code, but it's adopted by reference, which means that it's not actually in our municipal code. You have to go and find another copy of it, which is, even from a staff standpoint, even from an administrative type of standpoint where we're trying to look things up, is not the most convenient. And so one of the reasons that we felt that this was a good idea is not only were we able to tailor to a certain degree, I mean, within some limitations, to try to make it more Manitou-centric, but also it really puts the code where people are going to look it up, where the staff is going to look it up, and where citizens can look it up to see what those requirements are and that type of thing. And I think that's just a much more transparent and easier to access way of doing business. So.
Yeah, we were motivated by trying to have this code be user-friendly compared to some codes that you see around the nation.
Karina, in response to a question you had a few questions ago, was did we have other, I think you were asking if we had other comments on the ordinance. I have a few, and I imagine other
Yes.
council people do, but I think maybe it would make sense for you to go ahead with your presentation, and then if we could address the ordinance separately. Does that make sense to council?
Well, in a way, that's what we're doing, because the rest of the discussion is about the rental licensing program, and the housing habitability code is separate from that, and it's the work that we've already done. So I think I'm ready for your questions and comments.
Okay, if council, then if we wanted to discuss the ordinance, I guess it'd be the time. Okay, so questions on the ordinance per the draft that we received? Okay, I've got several things. It's on page 6 of the 12 pages there. It's 15.08.080, item L2, allow for automobile parking. And I guess this opened up the whole concept of with rental properties, what requirements do we have for parking? And then elsewhere in the ordinance, it looked like if it's three rental units or less, we don't address parking at all. Yeah, I guess if you could explain what the existing and the proposed situations are as to how we determine how much parking is required and how that's handled.
So the zoning code has parking based on whether you have a single unit structure or a multi-unit structure. And obviously, we know that there are a lot of buildings in town that don't comply with current parking requirements. So this code wouldn't require or make an existing property that may not comply, develop more parking. That generally would only be triggered if someone was, say, increasing their density or wanting to come in and subdivide a property or something like that. But the intent is that if you have parking, you need to keep it and use it. Not that you would have to develop up to current code if you don't already have it. So that's kind of the nuance between that. So, but it's parking requirements are listed in our zoning code. It depends on the number of units you have on a property.
It seems to me they could be a little clearer in the habitability, because parking is such a contentious and difficult situation. It seems to me in some cases by not addressing it fully up front, we create problems for ourselves, and then we get into these situations. I think a year ago when we were dealing with Banana Manor, the parking there, we figured that each unit was allowed 1.5 parking places. So for 7 units, we basically came with 14 because we rolled that 1.5 up to 2, and I kind of then wonder why do we have 1.5 units per space? That's rather illogical, I guess I'd say. So I would like to see some clarity as far as the parking on that. There were a couple places too. There were reference to CO2. I believe what we should have is CO or carbon monoxide. A couple of those. I'm sorry. Julie? And then also on the last page, page 12, 15.08.190, A variances. In there's a remark that every variance must run with the land. Several weeks ago when we had our joint meeting with the Planning Commission, there was a time we were talking about the VRBOs, and it seemed like about half of those properties have rights that run with the land, and the other half, as I understand it, they're specific to that owner. When the property's sold, that goes away. There seemed to be a certain amount of angst and regret on the part of Planning Commission as to how that evolved over time. So that kind of is a cautionary note to me. Maybe Mr. Parker would have some.
Keep on forgetting to turn that on again. Okay. I can join you, Kareem. I'm having trouble with the microphone too. So the variances can run with the land, or they could be specific to a personal, I guess, applicant. Typically, I think the general rule is that they would run with the land because they deal with a land use. But if for some reason you want to tie a variance to a specific applicant or a specific user of the land, I generally recommend that there be a reason why that specific user has special skills or qualities or something that would basically not make that variance applicable to a new user. And so that's generally the recommendation when dealing with variances when you're dealing with a land use issue, because you're sort of looking at the land use itself, not the actual individual who's undertaken that land use. But if you can tie the individual user's specific skills or whatever they possess to make that land use compatible, then I think it's appropriate to make it personal. In this case, it seems like if there's, I guess it could really be up to City Council how you want to proceed, but you're going to be approving a change in some kind of use with these certain criteria, and it seems like in general, it would not be a reason that would be only applicable to an individual or a specific user. It would basically be for that property itself. So that's why I think the run with the land is actually in there in this case. Does that make sense?
I think so. Thank you. It's still something, may take a little while to set in for
Right,
me.
you know, it's tricky, and we can give it some more thought in between this and the next meeting and see if there's a way to think about other options for that.
Yeah, it seemed like the experience, I was trying to learn from the Experience Planning Commission, and it looks like they had different rationales for different cases, and then it sort of became there was a certain degree of inconsistency that I think I sensed that they regretted, so
Yeah.
I'm just trying to learn from that.
Sure, sure. I think too, it's easier to kind of think about it if you put it in the terms of the kind of variance that we would be talking about in a housing code is really having to do with the housing, the building itself. You know, maybe it doesn't exactly meet an ingress window requirement, or, you know, there's a smaller than allowed bathroom. I'm just kind of pulling some things out that would really be specific to the building or the structure, and not to allowing someone a use that, you know, a non-residential use or something. If that kind of helps why it would really make more sense with this kind of thing to be something that would run with the property, because it would involve the structure itself, the building itself. I think the ones that you all, that you're referencing, those are conditional uses that, and those are different from variances. Those really are land, those are use of a property, not the structure itself, if that helps.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Counselor Johnson.
Do you know, so one, I actually just want to go on record saying that I actually do manage 2 rental units for the Manitou Art Center, just so you know. Do you have an estimate of how many rental units probably are not in compliance of this? I'm just thinking of what we would trigger as, like, what that impact would be.
I don't have a really good estimate. I think that we probably have more than what we might think there would be, but we also currently have a housing code. So when we get calls and there are issues, we already respond to those. So I don't see that we would see much difference with this code versus what we currently have. It would just be easier and frankly, a little more forgiving in some of the instances where we tailored a little bit. Where that, I think, discussion is really probably even more pertinent is if we do go down the road of the rental licensing, because then that's a more proactive step toward making sure that properties are safe and habitable, and we're not relying on you know, a renter to make a complaint, and that type of thing, because there would be an inspection provision and that type of thing. So, yeah, that's I think the discussion is something under rental licensing that would be even more topical for that.
Thank you. Julie?
Can you tell us how this code, exactly how does this differ from what we already have? Which parts are different? Which parts are new?
Well, there's a lot of similarities, because a lot of housing codes have, you know, they require that you have heat, they require you have refrigeration, they require you have, you know, windows with screens and, you know, certain types of light and air and that type of thing. So, you know, overall, it's not significantly different. There are some things that the HAB looked at in regard to dwelling size. We reduced the dwelling sizes a little bit because we have a lot of very small units. And we reduced the, where you figure out how much of a floor area you have when you have, say, sloping ceilings. There was a lot of discussion about that, and so we actually made that a little more lenient to be able to account for a little bit more room area when you're looking at that kind of thing. But, you know, overall, you're going to find a lot of the same provisions. You know, you got to keep it clean. It's got to be free of vermin. You know, that type of thing. We found a lot of things as we looked at that, that list of all the codes that we looked at, there were a lot of things that were, similar in all of those codes. So what this really does is it allows us a little bit of an opportunity to tailor, without going crazy. And, but it also puts the actual code language in the municipal code as opposed into another book that's sitting on another
Yeah.
shelf.
And so if this were passed, does this mean that tenants would be able to notify, I guess it would be code enforcement, and request an inspection if they believe there's a violation? Is that how the city would interact?
That's actually how we do it now. Yeah.
Excuse me, spelling the codes out a little more specifically offers protection to tenants more also, who are pretty vulnerable, as you're well aware these days, renting a place and not being afraid of reporting an issue, because they might tell you have to leave. So we're very cognizant of the fact that renter rights are important as well.
Yes, Julie?
Is this specific enough? Because I'm not familiar enough with housing code, but like, for example, there's sentences, where's this one, that says, talking about the hot water heater, no storage shall be allowed around the water heating equipment, comma, and it shall not be installed in sleeping areas. So around, that's a really vague word, Is 1 foot away okay? 3 feet, 7 feet? What? That just seems like when you have vague stuff like that, it's just asking for trouble. Can we tighten that up? Do you have any other codes that actually get more specific than that we could?
We can certainly go back
Copy.
and look at them. I don't think that I found any specific distances in any of the codes.
So how are you going to interpret that sentence?
Nothing should be touching the element. Certainly, that would be something we
Yeah, I
could
mean, as
say.
long as you can make a sentence that's enforceable. Right now, it sounds like we should just eliminate it because there's no definition of around in our definition section of the code. So unless you can tighten it up. So that would just be another suggestion where you could play with it so that people know what the rules are.
Mr. Parker, would
Yeah,
you
no,
have
I
some?
think that's a good point. I think we could change it to a distance, or we could change it to almost in a way that creates a hazard. And I think there is material in maybe the plumbing code or the fire code about how close things can be to hot water heaters. And I just had one of my houses inspected, and it depends upon the type of pipe that comes out. So I think it actually may be in another one of the building codes, like in your the one you've adopted. So we can probably address it that way.
Yeah, 2 feet for a cinder block, 10 feet for a can of gasoline or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, I know some of the hot water heaters have different types of pipes that bring out, and they're very safe. And the older kind are really hot, and it depends upon how. And so I think your plumbing code does cover that. But we could definitely put something that makes more sense, is more
Okay.
clear.
And that might be a little more familiar with an inspector and the whole inspecting discipline. Good, thank you. Other questions or comments from council?
May I just say that since you mentioned our neighborhood services person, Cindy Schwartz has attended some of our meetings and feels supportive. She's unable to attend tonight, but she feels supportive of the code and feels very comfortable enforcing it. So you know that. Speaking for her.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've attended, I think, all of the HAB meetings on this, and there's been tremendous discussion, effort, research done on this, and it becomes so apparent even after all of that you can't get to 100% on one of these codes. But I think they've absolutely done their due diligence. So these questions are very helpful, though, because it's fresh eyes on it. So, but and you've heard me say before, I really got to hand it to them for the work that they did. They brought in experts from other cities to discuss and so on, and Cindy was there on several of the occasions, so.
Thanks, Nancy. Any
Okay.
other questions, comments? And this isn't the last opportunity, so if you think of something as we're going along, you know, you can email me or Michelle, and we can discuss it.
Guess what kind of timeline do you envision on this? It looks like it's going back to the drafting board for a little more work.
There's some minor things I need to get with Jeff and, you know, some of these suggestions that have come out of this meeting. But I would imagine that, you know, we could have a draft ready for first reading within, you know, within a month. Quite easily.
Okay, I don't know that we're under any particular urgency to do this. I mean, obviously, we want to get it done, but I think we want to get it done right and have it right for the longest possible time.
Sure.
Council, comments, more discussion? Let's-
I have a question.
Yeah, Julie?
Jan.
Hmm?
Jeff, is this customary that, I can't tell what section I'm in. Oh, here we are. 15.08.130 subsection D. Is it common that we're saying, oh, if you don't want to let us in to do the inspection, that's fine, we'll just spend a lot of money and get a warrant instead?
Well, that
Do
would
we
be-
really have to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you basically couldn't go and do a search of somebody's home without a warrant. You didn't have to do it. You'd have to have probable cause. There's a code violation to do that, but that's generally the way you have to deal with these situations if you can't get permission or consent.
Okay, and then, does it have to be stated, or is it just implied that the warrant will be issued if there's probable cause that there may be any violation of this entire ordinance or something like that, or
Yeah, I
is
mean,
that?
Yeah, that's basically the standard for getting a search warrant, so I didn't think we needed to put it in there. but
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Denise?
Yeah, normally this would have come to our work session, so it's unique that it's here for a regular session. Just work sessions have been filled up with other items, so that's why we brought it here. The mayor and I, when they're ready, the mayor will look at it because he has to approve it to get on an agenda item, and it will be a first and second reading. So this is a little different than what we normally do, but it's just because the work sessions have been pretty full.
Okay, that's a good point. Thanks, Denise. I should have mentioned that.
Oh, and I just want to say thank you for working on this.
Yeah, and
It's-
to all those members of the HAB who are here, thank you. We'd like to express our personal appreciation. Thanks for coming out tonight.
Absolutely, and
Good
I
work you've done.
appreciate you. I appreciate you all saying that, because actually, I worked on a housing code something like 20 years ago, and it's been sitting in draft in a file cabinet, and it's been something that both personally and professionally, I felt like we needed for a long time to have our own. And I was so happy when the HAB wanted to take it up. So they've done a humongous amount of work, but I've supported that, you know, both personally and professionally. I think it's good for the community.
Any further comments, council? Guess not. Well, very good. I guess we'll see you back in a month or, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Back to you.
All right, so moving on now, discussion regarding proposed rental licensing program. The reason that we're here tonight regarding this item is that we want to basically get your temperature on whether or not council wants to proceed with this program. Before, you know, it's a lot of work to put a program such as this together, although we can certainly cut and paste from other communities. And that's getting easier and easier because more and more communities in Colorado and certainly around the nation are adopting rental licensing programs. Most notably, Denver recently did that. They have something like 55,000 rentals and really wanted to get a handle on all of that. And their website's amazing. They've got so much supplemental information, and they approach it, and as did the woman that we spoke with from Westminster. It's really approached as an educational process with the community. And it's approached from a partnership way, like we're partners in this, the city and those of you who own buildings and are renting to people. We're partners in making sure that we have safe, habitable housing. You know, when people go home, they want to find some peace. It's crazy out there, as we all know, and our homes need to be safe enough for us to feel comfortable and safe, mentally as well as physically, if we can do that. And so I just want to point out that the approach that most communities are taking is not punitive with regard to the rental licensing programs. And we require licensing in Manitou already for buildings that have 4 or more units. But there are a number that don't, that are much smaller than that. And so this would bring them into compliance. And of course, those that already exist would have to comply with this new code if it becomes adopted as well. And let's see, I think that the COVID crisis has really highlighted the fact that housing and public health go hand in hand. And not just in terms of spreading germs and disease, but also in terms of providing, again, safety, the right building materials, like a counter that's not plywood, that you can actually clean in a kitchen, that would allow for getting rid of germs. So I think that's interesting that the emphasis now nationwide regarding public health and housing. Generally, you see here that the rental licensing program has benefits for the city, certainly for the tenants, and for the owners as well. The woman, Holly, from Westminster, actually gave us a story about an owner of a property who came to her as an enforcement officer to please come and help deal with this tenant that basically they wanted to evict, but they kind of used the city to do it, I guess. It was interesting. It was a partnership that they had in that sense because the person was really difficult.
She also had told us about that she had landlords that actually they really supported the rental licensing program because basically for a nominal fee, they were getting inspections and finding out about things that were going wrong that the renters were not telling them about. The air conditioning wasn't working or, whatever. Toilet was leaking and had been for, since the last inspection or whatever. And he said that, he found that it saved him a tremendous amount of money by being able to get in and do repairs before they got so critical. And so he really thinks that it, thought it was a great program. And I think it's worth saying that we all know that codes are not necessarily for those, people that are great property managers and great landlords and, they're not going to have any problems. But we do have properties, and over the years, it's been pretty appalling, some of the situations that we've encountered with rental properties in particular. When I first started to work for the city, every rental, single-family home or above, if you were renting it, you had to have a rental license, which was basically just a business license, and there wasn't a whole lot tied to it, but it at least allowed us to know, you had to have some contact information. We knew a little bit more about properties that were rentals and properties that weren't. And, it gave us a little bit more handle on things. That changed about 10 years or so after I started to work for the city and went to this 4 units and above rule. And so we're seeing, we have properties that you kind of think, man, I think that was less units, but we don't know because there's no documentation, there's no license that's been had for the last few years saying it's 3 and now all of a sudden they're saying it's 4, that type of thing. So, it is something that, without getting into too many hairy details, that from a staff standpoint and from, the years of seeing code enforcement and the things that they've run into, and back when I did the enforcement and things that I ran into, it's something that we really need. We really need to consider, and I think it's something that we really need. And it's not to hurt anybody, it's actually to help everybody across the board. We can help landlords, because we have a lot of landlords that maybe this is their only rental property, and so we can, try to set standards to help them realize you do need to have a lease, you do need to have insurance and that type of thing. And then, renters that they just want to live here in Manitou, and some of them I think would sign a lease or just, hand their check over to just about anybody because they want to be here. And you can run into some pretty interesting situations with some of our rental property, so.
And again, for the city and for planning department, one of the biggest benefits is actually knowing who owns the houses, the buildings, having a person that you can contact. I think during the flood, there were some houses along Manitou Avenue, you couldn't reach anybody that owned them, to let them know that perhaps they weren't standing up properly anymore. So that's true for every community, that the contact information is extremely important.
And you can tailor a code to say, say if you want to require a local contact or within, the close region, as opposed to a Denver property management company or something. There's things that we can look at that certainly we don't have to, get in the weeds on tonight, but there's things that we could do that I think would help, much like we put in for the vacation rental requirements, about management and that type of thing. Well, this is at least as important as that. So that's just kind of my soapbox.
Thank you. Counselor Wolf?
Well, this is just another little picky detail, but under 15.08.160B, I think the first sentence should say, after the $500, I think it should say per day. Otherwise, it kind of sounds like it contradicts the next sentence. It's saying that the maximum punishment for violating this law is $500. And then the next sentence says, there'll be a separate offense daily. I don't know. I think maybe that's fine legally, but I think it would make more sense to landlords who are reading this if it says violations will be punished $500 per day, and then the next sentence makes more sense.
So noted, I believe. Okay. Good. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks. I would support asking the HAB and staff to pursue the licensing program particularly because they can really build a lot of carrots into it. They can build carrots in for energy efficiency. They can build carrots in for if you are compliant over a number of years, you don't have to pay the licensing fee every year. So there's just a number of things that can be done. And I like the characterization of it's more of an education program. The woman from Westminster was very impressive. She has 20 years, highly successful, proven program. And so I think that, as Michelle said earlier, this is the habitability code is reactive. It's just complaint-based, and it's for all residences, not just rental residents. Whereas this is for rentals, and I just think that it's an appropriate direction for the city to be going in to do something like this. And it would be self-sustaining with the fees charged to do the inspections. So that would need a lot of finesse. So it is a lot of work, though, to put this together.
Thank you. Counselor Chandler?
I wholeheartedly agree with Mayor Pro Tem Fortune. I believe that this is just so long overdue. And there is no reason why we should have codes that apply to 4 units and above that don't apply to all rentals. And I just applaud the effort, and I'm actually really excited about it. And I think that this is a win-win, and I really look forward to you bringing it forward, and thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody on council that's opposed to us proceeding?
Well, I was about
with
to
this?
ask that. I
Oh,
also
I'm sorry.
noticed Counselor Wolf had her hand up. Julie?
Does the code require any action if there's unsafe wiring that's not visible from the living area? In other words, if you know that there's some creepy knob and tube and stuff still active up there, can the inspector go in the attic? Or is this just to make sure that we don't have too many extension cords and like that?
Inspectors don't usually go as far as tracking down the wiring in the walls or up in the attic. Now, if there's evidence of some sort of failure, you can see that you've got black, soot coming out of some receptacles, where somebody tried to plug something in and had a little bit of a fire, they might do something like that, or look at it and require that the landlord or the property owner bring an electrician in to confirm that it's in good shape and it's not a danger. But as long as it's functioning correctly, it's not something then that would raise issues.
And this sounds really expensive in terms of actually implementing it. Do we have any information from other cities on how much it would cost to do these inspections, and therefore how much to charge for these licenses, or is that for the future?
That's actually some of the work that needs to be done so that we can try to balance, the cost of the program with fees and maybe like some of what Mayor Pro Tem Fortune was talking about. If you pass your first inspection with flying colors and it's great, maybe you don't have to come back for another inspection for 3 years or 2 years or something like that. So looking at some of those to make it more cost effective.
And in many communities, it is the expense of the renter, the property owner, to get an inspection. There are licensed, the city could partner with some licensed inspectors and basically give them a form to fill out and get out of the middle of it. So that eliminates a lot of administrative, yeah. So, yeah. But the fees often, it's like, I wrote that down a little bit, like for the inspection, $50 for 1 unit, $100 for units that are 2 to 10 units to be inspected. This is by the city, not necessarily by private inspector. $250 for 11 to 50 units.
Can I ask you about that? Are you
Yeah.
reading from what some other city charges?
Yeah, I am.
Well, I was going to say, I can't imagine finding anybody who's a qualified inspector to inspect up to 10 units for $50 or $100.
Right, I think.
So part of this is not self-sustaining.
Yeah, this is from Westminster, where they do their own, they have something like 3 inspectors, yeah. But here again, I talked to Cindy about this, and she didn't seem intimidated at all. Oh, yeah, I could do it. I don't know if she realizes, we don't have that many buildings. But
I don't know
can
that
I
if she
add
has that
something?
much free time.
Yeah.
I mean, we already have problems with not enough inspections being done by code enforcement, whatever it's supposed to be called now, friendly group or something. But I can't imagine that we
That
can
she
just
can do
add
it.
all of this work onto
Yeah.
another employee. It won't get done.
I just want to respond also a little bit to what you were talking about with regard to wiring. Another thing that Holly from Westminster talked about was the fact that everybody's working from home. We got like 3 or 4 computers set up and printers and all other kinds of electronic devices. And what if you're living in an apartment or a house that was built in 1940 and just has 2 outlets, and you're not really, and you start blowing fuses? So, I mean, with regard to the rental licensing, it gives, the owner of the building can specify, for instance, that they can't operate that many devices, and they're not forced to rewire because the tenant wants it. But perhaps they would put that in their lease, that it can only support so many devices. But that has become more of an issue, with COVID and working from home.
Okay, thank you. I think we're trying to get the temperature of council, and we've heard from councilors Wolf and Chandler and Mayor Pro Tem Fortune. So I call on Mr. Bremner, what's your thoughts?
I'm in favor of going forward with it.
Thank you. Anything else, Steve? Okay. Natalie?
I'm also in favor of moving forward.
Push forward, okay. John, you're good with it? I could be okay with that, too. So I think our direction then is to go forward. I know I'd be curious about this last item we brought up here is how, what's the implementation? How do we actually make this work? Because as Councilor Wolf said, it's hard to imagine how much inspection you're going to get for $50. And I know regional building on a lot of their routine inspections like electric and so forth, the average time is something like 15 minutes. So, and those inspectors are expected to do upwards of 30 inspections a day. And so it's pretty quick and specific, and that's a different kind of inspection. But if we want somebody who's going to go through an apartment or a house with some degree of thoroughness, it may be more expensive than we think. So,
They phase it in. A lot of communities phase it in, like single-family homes, what Denver's doing. That if you have a single-family home, you're supposed to apply for.
can you get a little closer to the microphone? Corinne?
If you have if you have a single-family home, you're supposed to apply, that's a rental, by 2024. If you have 2 or more units by 2023, 2 to 10 units, you can opt in and get a reduction on inspection fees. You can opt in early, but they're not initiating really until 2022, and then they're phasing it in, by the number of units.
But I don't want anybody to think that we're going to sit here and say that there, would definitely be no staffing implications. I think that would be, not reasonable, and it's something that we'll certainly bring information back and hopefully be able to give you all either, a strong recommendation or maybe some options for how to deal with it.
Okay, thank you. And since this is a presentation, I don't think we need a formal vote on this, but the council, I think, has given you a unanimous go-ahead on this. No objections from council? Okay. I would suggest that we take a 10 or 15-minute break now. And the next item is going to be presentation on long-term financial sustainability, so I think that'll take some concentration. So let's go ahead and take a break. Could we start to take our seats, and we'll get started here in a few minutes? Okay, I think we have everything we need. We'll go ahead and get started again. So the next item is a presentation of long-term financial sustainability options for the city. And that'll be presented by Becca Davis, our finance officer.
Good evening. So the memo and the PowerPoint are in the packet, so I don't plan to read it verbatim, but rather just hit the high points. Also, I want to mention that Robin Moore, our Stiefel financial advisor, will be joining us by the new conference phone, although her slide is near the end of the PowerPoint. So to begin, as per Conrad Schlauerbaum, the community advisor on the Manitou Springs Environmental Climate Action Work Group, who recently made a presentation to City Council on sustainability and resilience, there are 4 dimensions of sustainable development: economic prosperity, social inclusiveness, environmental sustainability, and demonstration of good governance. This evening, I am addressing financial sustainability and how it applies to our city's economic prosperity. Before we can talk about future financial sustainability options, we first need to understand the sources of the city's current revenues for its operating fund, the general fund. Using the 2021 amended budget, one can see the revenues come from a variety of sources, but the dominant revenue source at 78.51% is taxes. And I love the way the pie chart is such a really good visual image of that. When one breaks out all the taxes, the dominant type is sales tax, and that's at 76.63% of all the taxes. Okay, now we're getting it even down further. Staff has been providing sales tax reports broken out into the same 6 vendor types since like 1999. And those are amusement bars, shops, stores, which are, food or gas, lodging, restaurants, other in city, and that includes the retail marijuana, and outside of city. And the big gorilla in outside of city is Colorado Springs Utilities, which charges a sales tax on the electricity. But we've been seeing a lot bigger influx into that area from internet sales, which are delivered here. So that category has grown. But clearly, the big dominant vendor type is other in city, which is 45.53% of all the sales tax, and at rounding off 3,600,000 is 27% of the entire budgeted revenues. So now I'm going to look at the expenditure sides of things. That's a little more evenly divided. We don't have one huge dominant type expenditure there. But in our current general fund budget expenditures, there's not only the operating, but there's also economic development and capital improvement expenditures. The capital improvement expenditures are 10% of the budget, and that falls down at the bottom. It's hard to see, but it's those transfers. The East End transfer to capital improvement fund, that's the amount of the 2020 TIF to the ERA that the city retained. And then the transfer to capital improvements is just the regular annual transfer from the general fund to the capital improvements fund to take care of the needs for this particular year. I went ahead and did a little breakout of the economic development because that was about 20% of all the expenditures. And it breaks out into the business promotion and then the URA sales tax TIF, which is particularly large this year because it includes not only 2021 revenues generated by the East End, but also half of the 2020 revenues that were generated last year, which the city retained until the beginning of 2021. So if city sales tax, the other in city sales tax decreases, we would of course have to adjust. We can look at cutting expenditures. We can look at spending down the fund balance because that's why you build up a big healthy fund balance so that when you run into issues, you don't immediately have to just jerk the rug out from everyone's feet. You can ease into your solutions. Or finally, we can look at ways of increasing revenues.
Becca, can I interrupt 1 second?
Sure.
It's my understanding if we were to lose that, it would stop the capital, but it wouldn't stop the services. Is that correct? We have enough money in our budget, and our budget accordingly allows us to keep the services going. It's the capital that is what most of that is being funded with. Is that correct?
I would say services would have to be cut some. You're right, capital, that would be immediately impacted, and we really would have to look at our operating expenditures and see what we could do to adjust there, unless we could increase our revenues. And there's 3 main funding sources for revenues. There's a new sales tax, a new property tax, or a new fee. Now, for a sales tax, there are some procedures. First, City Council would have to create a ballot issue, and then citizens would have to vote to increase the sales tax or property tax, and then the City Council would have to approve an ordinance enacting the new sales tax or property tax, and without these things happening, there would be no new tax. And there's a question about exactly how much would a tax bring in. Now, property tax, we know it's a lot more solid number because it's based on the assessed values of the city. And so a mill for 2021 is $70,278. So it would have to be multiple mills, but it could certainly be done to bring in more money. Now, sales tax is more questionable. It's more elastic. If a sales tax raises up too high, then maybe people wouldn't be willing to come and spend money here. So it's more iffy. You can't say if we do a 0.1% sales tax, we will definitely then raise $160,000, which is my conservative estimate on what it would bring in based on current forecast. And then we also have the special retail marijuana sales tax, which was approved by ballot, and they approved a range. The citizens have approved a range on it. So it could run from 5 to 10% and can be changed at any time by ordinance by city council. And right now it's at 6%. And based on our current budgeted forecast, I believe a 1% increase could generate up to around $355,000. That's a very general estimate because I'm basing it upon my numbers out of the other in city. Yes, John?
So you said for each 1% in that 5 to 10% range is a $350,000 bump?
Right. No guarantees.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just trying to figure out what percentage of what. And so you said we have the authority for 5 to 10%. We're currently taxing at 6%.
That's correct.
That's essentially the council's prerogative to raise that in that range. And so for each 1% bump in there is approximately $350K, correct?
We could possibly see
Okay,
that amount.
thank you.
Then there's that third option, transportation utility fee. And I bring this up because when Malcolm Fleming was the interim city administrator in 2018, my memo says 2021, that's obviously wrong. Well, I was pointing out a mistake in here, that's why I backed off. Okay, he was asked to provide a presentation concerning possible ways to provide economic vitality to the city. He presented the potential of a new fee called a transportation utility fee, and it is a type of fee used to assist in funding the maintenance and development of transportation infrastructure and is billed through utility bills. It treats the city's streets as a utility provided to the citizens, and this fee could not be spent on anything else, so it would be put into its own separate fund, and then all the expenses related to infrastructure and its maintenance would be pulled into that fund for transportation. It's also known as a street maintenance fee, a road use fee, and a street utility fee. Now, it's not an unknown type of fee. Both Pueblo and Loveland charge the fee, and I provided their rate structures in this PowerPoint as examples of how it could be implemented. As you can, well, hopefully you can see, Pueblo charges $3 per month for residential, and then it breaks out into other different types of rates and things which would have to be decided upon. Yes?
Are you presenting all these slides because you recommend that we should raise taxes?
I'm presenting this in terms of financial sustainability. If we lose our biggest tax, sales tax, in terms of the other in the city, which provides 27% of our major sale of all our revenues,
Right.
we would have to be looking at either cutting expenditures, increasing revenues.
Oh, I understand that, but my question is, are you presenting this because you're recommending that we do one of these things? Or are you just presenting this because someday, when the marijuana stores don't bring in that much money for us anymore, then you're giving us a preview of what we'll discuss when the time comes? Or is this something you recommend we look at now? I'm not clear on why this is on the agenda. I just didn't have any preliminary explanation.
Right, I feel it's more as just a reality check. Because when you base your...
No, you're not recommending. No. A reality check is no or yes? Or maybe?
Can I
I don't get it.
Julie, if I could add into this, I think the thought behind economic sustainability is what should we think about? And I guess when I initially thinking about doing this, my thought was, what happens if we lose the marijuana money? Or if, like with COVID, we're such it's a discretionary income business, hospitality and tourism. What do we do? A year ago in the spring, I was frankly terrified that we were going to have to close the city down just because we wouldn't have any money at all. That's probably, and I mean, as it turned out, things have turned out reasonably well. But having gone through that scare once, I think it would be good to look at some other options. I don't think we really are entertaining the idea of raising taxes at this point. We're feeling pretty good. I think we've got like 4 to 5 months of cash in the bank right now. So I think this is sort of an academic
That's
exercise.
what I wanted to know.
Okay.
Is this just exploring information, or do you want us to vote on something?
No, it's
No, this
just
is
a presentation.
purely advisory. I mean, and if they had a proposal to, like, somehow we could make enough beer and sell it and make money that way, I'd be up for that too, and we wouldn't have to raise taxes.
And the current expenditures is 2021?
Yes.
And are you going to tell us, or do we have an opportunity to find out a little more about the details of some of these pies? Like $3 million for economic development, are you going to
Right, that was the,
explain that?
yeah, I can go back to that. Yeah, I
It just
broke,
seems like a huge,
see, that's,
almost 25% of our budget. I'm wondering,
right,
what
that's why I
and
broke it
why.
out. It has its own special slide, except I don't have a pie on this one because it wasn't a very good pie. So business promotion and tourism, that's the money that the city gives the chamber, because we do have it in our code that lodging tax and then a percentage of sales tax and a percentage of the excise tax goes to business promotion and tourism. So for 2021, it's $409,000. And then we're spending a little extra on the business promotion and tourism, and it's under discretionary, and it's the $30,000 for holiday lights in 2021. And then finally, the really large percentage here is the ERA sales tax tip, which is $2,570,000, and of that, $831,644 is actually from the 2020 sales tax TIF to the ERA. That was the amount the city retained, and then at the beginning of the year, gave it back to the ERA. So that's how we came up with the $3,009,000. Oh,
May I
sure.
interrupt for a second? I think as you know, budget season is coming up, right? So this is the opportunity to just talk about the funding and discuss that. This, again, should have been during a work session, but because work sessions are so busy, we're having to put some presentations during regular meetings. So it's really looking at different options as we as a city need to plan forward. And if something was to change, here are some options just as a communication for you guys to start thinking about. And if we're getting ready to present to you a facilities master plan pretty soon, hopefully, about different capital projects that may be needed, and if you want to do it, how you might do that. And here are some options. So that will be part of the budget season. So you can look at it and say, yes, we want to tackle this, or no, we don't. We want to wait for a couple of years, or whatever that may be. So it's really just providing the education of the opportunities that's out there to start thinking about during budget season.
Thank you. Becca?
Yeah, I'm just getting back.
Sure.
And then so Loveland also has this charge, and they charge $2.88 per month for the residents, and then they also have that other breakout. But finally, in addition to operating needs, financial sustainability also concerns capital improvements. Now, we've been following mainly a pay-as-you-go, where we get grants and then use our funding as grant matches, which is a great way to really leverage your dollar. But if we have a big project that requires more than available funding, that's when debt options might need to be considered. And when debt is talked about, well, there's usually three types we discuss. And that's the lease purchase, and that one we do tend to use on a yearly basis. It's the short-term debt of 5 to 10 years for equipment and vehicles. And it's not considered true debt because the annual payments are reappropriated on a yearly basis, and that's why citizens don't have to vote on that one. And then there's something called a certificate of participation, which is a type of lease purchase where city property is used as collateral for obtaining funding and also does not require a vote of the citizens. And then finally, we have bonding. Now, this does require a vote of the citizens. And at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Robin Moore, our Stiefel financial advisor, so she can address this slide about potential borrowing cost.
Hi. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Robin Moore. Thanks, Becca. I'm going to, I'll spend a few minutes talking about the different types of debt, and I can see you all on my live stream. Feel free to jump in and ask questions. Really, I think just like the overview that Becca was giving, this is just meant to be an overview of what's out there, and then I'll talk a little more specifically about your community and based on, we're looking at the general fund here, so based on our review of the revenues and expenses, historical, over the last 10 years or so, where we think you fall right now as to what the options are. So just really briefly, I don't want to get into too much detail, but, Becca gave a really good overview that, a lease purchase and a certificate of participation, they're very similar. So, we typically see lease purchases for equipment, vehicles, they're a little bit shorter, they're placed directly with the bank. Certificates of participation, tend to be more for like city halls or jails. Both of them, as Becca said, are annually appropriating, which means you're essentially, in your mind, you need to think about them as longer-term debt. So if you enter into it for a 10-year period or a 20-year period, you need to think about it as if you're committing yourself to 20 years or 10 years. But the investor is getting, whether it's a bank or a conglomerate of institutional investors, they're getting only a one-year pledge of the debt service. And every year in your budget, you need to renew that pledge and have it as a line item, appropriation. Bonds are out there for, I think we talked about in the past when we've talked to you all, we talked about in terms of essentially the wastewater fund or for the parking enterprise. Bonds are long-term obligations. For the general fund, if for a sales tax or property tax bond, you would need to have an election because under Tabor, as you all probably know, you would be entering into a multiple fiscal year obligation for a tax-supported debt. So you do not need a vote for a water utility bond, a parking enterprise bond. For a sales tax bond, a property tax bond, you would need to vote the tax, and then, again, because Tabor does not allow you to have more than one issue on a ballot question, you'd have to have a separate ballot question for the type of debt. So, those are the options that are out there. Right now, again, we're focusing just on the general fund. And, what we present to the institutions that are buying this debt, that are giving you the money, they want to see a history of revenues that exceed expenses, at least to some level. So they want to go back and see that the revenue is coming from, a somewhat, variety of sources. In Colorado, we're particularly sales tax dependent compared to other states. But we go back and we look at, what has been the revenue trend? Is there high concentration of revenue? And earlier in the presentation, Becca talked about that, you do have, a couple of sales tax, a couple of your sales tax contributors make up a pretty substantial amount of your sales tax revenue. So obviously we get worried that if one or both of those go away, you'd have a pretty, that's a big cliff event. You'd potentially have revenue that you're relying on now that's not there. And, I would say, you all just captured this in the question when you asked, are you looking to do something now? And I think your response is, well, you're in a good position. And I, for now you are, right? And taking aside what could happen in the future, I would say from a debt perspective, though, from a general fund debt perspective, your revenues are generally aligning with the expenditures, but there's not a lot of cushion in there. And so I would get worried that if you had a fairly large project or something that required debt, that in some years, if you go back to the historical revenues and expenses, there are some years in the last couple of years where you had a negative position, and so your expenses exceeded your revenues. I think you've been helped out in the last couple of years. Obviously, the federal funds has helped out. Your sales tax has come in well. And again, we'd also sort of project out, well, what could happen if half of the sales tax money went, half of the 45% that's highly concentrated went away. So, I would say right now you're in a position where you're able to sustain your expenses compared to the revenues. From a debt perspective, we would probably need to see more revenue come in from one of the additional sources that Becca talked about before we felt comfortable accessing the debt markets. So that's a lot of talking. I think I'll pause there and let you guys ask any questions that you might have, either about the debt markets or about our perspective on your, revenues, expenses, and just the general fund overall.
Council questions? Julie?
Oh, you mentioned that we don't have a lot of cushion. What is your recommendation in terms of our reserves?
Well, it's less about the reserves. I mean, you have a healthy level of reserves, but, I'm looking back at the 10 years of revenues versus, general fund revenues and general fund expenses. So, if I'm reading your 2018 numbers correctly, you've got general fund revenue about 10.3 million, you've got general fund expenditures of 11.9. So that puts you in a negative situation. So it's very helpful to have reserves, but we really would need to see, we would want to see that the revenues and expenditures are aligning and that's a consistent trend. And, again, it's helpful that you have the reserves, but the fact that you don't always have cushion in any given year of your net operating revenues versus your expenditures, that's one of the metrics that we look closely at, in addition to how much cash you have.
And what kind of cushion do you recommend? What kind of cushion is reasonable or better than what we have?
Yeah, so, when we look at, if with us we're a utility or an enterprise, there's actually a legal requirement, and we call that debt service coverage. So what's your net operating revenues compared to the debt service in any given year? And in that case, we like to see, at a very minimum, let's say 130%, roughly. These are all rough numbers. We like to see a little bit higher, but at a minimum, when you look at, so if you have $100 of debt, you'd want to have net operating revenues of about 130. And, particularly when you're sales tax reliant, because that's a more volatile revenue stream than, let's say, a water fee. Obviously water funds have their own elasticity to them. That's a utility. I kind of use the same gauge when I look at a general fund. And these are just rough numbers, so we're not backing out some, there's probably one-time expenditures in there, if I'm looking over time, I'm sure there's numbers that back out. But generally speaking, we want to see at least a cushion of more revenue and, somewhere around at least, I would say, 120, so $120 for every maybe $100 of debt that you're going to issue. And again, it depends on the type of debt, depends on the project. Sometimes projects spin off additional revenue. So, there's a wide variety, variability to that number, but it's a little bit worrisome when you look at the composition of the revenues and you see that they're highly concentrated, they potentially could go away. That's kind of it's kind of a factor there that's sort of contributing to a number that might be a little bit higher when you look at revenues compared to expenditures.
So if I were to recap, is this correct that basically what you're saying is, and if we focus exclusively on the general fund for the moment, that we really should spend only 70 or 80% of the money that we bring in? Is that a correct recap of what you just explained?
Well, it depends what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. So if
Oh, we're running the city. I mean, I'm talking about the general fund, just what we're doing.
So Robin, we
well,
have,
if you want to have, I'm more talking in the context of debt.
yeah, you're,
If you're operating the city without any, a lease or a certificate of participation or a bond issue, then I don't know that you need to have that kind of cushion. I think, this is a little bit outside of our purview. Our focus is on, helping you think through debt issues. But, obviously there's a lot of things that you focus on as the council and as managing the city when it comes to the revenues and expenses. One of them is the history, and the other is, pro forma, looking forward, what could happen.
So
I
I'm
think that's more a
confused.
question-
Wait, can I just stop you for a second? I'm sorry. I'm so confused. So I don't get it.
Robin, can
You
I?
think we should spend less than 100% of the general fund sales tax that comes in, but you don't feel comfortable telling us what percent that is, or you do, or did I didn't get it.
Robin, could I interrupt for 1 second? I think we're talking about two different things. So our reserves right now, we're going to end this year with about a 40% reserves, which is the best the city has been forever. What Robin, or for a very long time, is the plan. So we've built, for the last 2 years, really building up the reserves to talk about capital and what you want to do with this. What Robin is talking about is if we wanted to borrow and go out for bonds, and what the bond issuers would look at in order to get a bond. And her recommendation is that we really don't have the ability to go and ask for a bond without a property tax increase or a mill levy, because tourism is too volatile. So we're not going to be able to sell those bonds right now because it's too volatile and we don't have the reserves. Like utilities can go and sell bonds because they have regular amount that comes in and there isn't the volatility that we have. So she's talking about those reserves from a bond issuing, not from a general fund operation, because the best practice is like 17 to 25% is a good reserves. And we're hoping to end this year with a 40. And then again, that strategy, how do you want to move forward? What are the capital projects that you really want to tackle? And how does that look? So what Robin is saying, bonds is really not an issue without a mill levy increase. Does that make sense? Does that help? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And when you look at slide 4, it really shows that our real estate property tax is about $744,000. That doesn't sustain the city. It's the sales tax and the other things as we move forward. So it's really being able to talk about all of that as we look at budgets and how we move forward and the strategy.
Thank you. Well, go ahead, if we can do it quickly and then get back to the main theme. Go ahead, Julie.
Actually, I'll pass.
Okay, great. Maybe some of this get answered in the presentation. So do we need to go back to Robin, I think, or back to you, Becca?
I think we're now to our point where I say this concludes our presentation on financial long-term sustainability. And are there any more questions?
I think there's probably a lot of questions. Council? Julie?
So in the future, am I correct that we could just go ahead, for example, as one alternative if we need money and discontinue the funding of the URA, for example? Because that's a lot of money that we send over there, $2.5 million a year. So do we have that kind of option also if there is a sales tax, significant decrease in sales tax and we have a crunch? I realize that might not help in terms of qualifying for a bond, But is that something that, isn't that an ordinance that we could pass to help us out?
The ERA agreement was approved by resolution, and in it, it says that the city council decides whether or not to give them the sales tax TIF after they present a well, we've been doing it after they present their financials.
You
When's
can't,
that?
When they present their budget.
When's that?
at the end of the year. They do it at the beginning of the year, but that is an option. You
So
as
that'll be
council-
something we can look
Yes.
at budget time?
Yep, you could, and that's been discussed in the past, so you do have the option to do that. You have an option if you wanted to raise the tax on the marijuana without going to voters, so, and you have a transportation tax. So those are just options to consider, and those are kind of the three that's very easy. May not be the right option, but just as something to consider.
Counselor Chandler, please.
So thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. So in the spirit of this being just a general discussion, I want to specifically talk about the transportation utility fee that this is a new thing that came up, and you devoted several slides to it, and it would be another burden to the resident taxpayers here. And I just want to throw this out, that we spend 22% on economic development, and it works. People come here, and how they get here is they drive. And they use our roads. They use our roads a lot more than I do. I have 2 cars, but I don't use them to get around Manitou because I wouldn't drive into Manitou, except for Tuesday night for council, right? So I'll walk into Manitou. I'm grateful to do that. I'll ride a bike, and I'll take the shuttle when that's in service. So one of the things that isn't on here, speaking of our roads and fees, are parking fees. And so I think if we're going to talk about a transportation utility fee that would be an additional burden on our taxpayers, we also, I think, need to talk about increasing our parking fees. Now, I know that Colorado Springs charges $1 an hour, but we do have an entity here in town that charges $2.50 an hour, and that's the COG. Because for 4 hours, you pay $10. Because you brought up Pueblo and Loveland as far as the TUFs, I did try to find out how much they charge for their parking, even though they're not really considered, in my mind, a destination tourist destination. But I wasn't able to find that out. Their websites are horrible, so after 20 minutes I bailed. But I think if we're going to talk about that, we need to seriously consider one of our biggest assets and consider how much does it cost for us to maintain the roads for the people that come here to park. And so I don't have an idea in mind of how much we should raise the parking fee, but I really just want that to be part of the discussion if we're going to talk about TUFs.
And I
think Denise has, Denise, please.
We'll be looking at the parking fees and bringing to you in the near future, probably within the March, April timeframe, again, before the next season starts, a proposed parking fee for you to look at and evaluate and say, do you want it higher, do you want it lower? But that will all be going through the Transportation Mobility Group to get their perspective, and then we'll bring it to you like we do every year for fees. So that is definitely something that we'll be doing, and that will be part of the budget season as we go forward too, of what we think we'll bring in, and then for you to decide, hey, we need a little bit more, what that may be. So great ideas, thank you.
And just for your edification, I've put it back on the slide that shows all the revenues. So you can see that the parking revenues are about $1.2 million, which as a percentage of the total is 9.15% of the total revenues.
And it looks like it comes in at number 2 as the largest, right?
You are correct.
So it's the second largest. So I think once again, we need to take a robust look at that.
And that was increased quite a bit this year when we did parking everywhere. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Mr. Shada.
Thank you. Mr. Shea?
Yeah, I just want to correct Judith's math real quick. the Cog Railway charges $3.75 an hour for the first 3, and then for each marginal hour over that, it's $5. So if you're there for 4 hours, it's 15.
Oh, okay.
So you can choose
okay, so
to
thank you for that
average
correction.
15 by 4, or you can kind of view it as sort of the way they charge, which is that they charge $10 for 3 hours, and then if they notice you're there a minute over the 3rd hour, then they knock you up for another $5 per hour over it. So just as a perspective in terms of kind of what other people are kind of charging. The Iron Spring Chateau has a similar rate as well. Okay.
Thank you for that correction. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah.
Having not parked up there since, I don't know, the 1970s. But so I think that we need to, as a city, even more so look at what other entities are charging when people come into our town and use our roads, and take a good look at that. Thanks for that correction.
Thank you. Julie?
I can't remember what I just read recently. I think in the weekly city report, it was parking fees or traffic tickets or something that said we're charging the wrong amount, and we're not going to charge the right amount, which is much higher, until someday when the parking logic signs get working, which I don't think they ever will. So I don't know what is it that we're not doing right? Is it the fines for the overtime?
Correct, the citation amounts were incorrect, as far as I can tell, from 2017.
And
So we are gonna increase them once we get the machines up and running for that. So that's as soon as possible. We're close to getting it. We have to work through our vendor on that, because that's why we're switching the T2. But currently, we're with the old vendor still until we get it all switched over to T2. And it's kind of like a DOS system, so they have to help us change the fees. So we should have that ready actually in a few days. And we'll be charging the correct fee.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Counselor Johnson?
I just want to make sure we don't lose track of this conversation, because I do think it's really important. And I do find it a little terrifying how much we rely on tourism to sustain Manitou, so I do want to talk about that, in addition to the fact that interest rates are incredibly low right now, and it may be fiscally responsible for us to look at borrowing now as opposed to later.
Good point. Anyone else? Okay.
Weren't we told that we can't borrow anything right now because we don't have enough of the cushion? Or did I miss that?
Robin?
The general fund would be challenging, and I certainly wouldn't say you can't access the markets. We had talked about the enterprise funds that, if there's a particular project that you're looking at, we certainly can explore financing there. I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I think it's going to be project specific, and if there's something that you all want to explore, I don't think I don't think the dollar size would be large, but you're absolutely right. Rates are low. We would just have to look a little more closely at what it is you want to borrow for, and dig a little bit more into the finances particular to repaying the debt for that particular project.
We have borrowed from our enterprise, the water and wastewater. That's one of the positives about an enterprise. You can do it very quickly when the rates are low, and you can act very quickly. So we have borrowed to get some of those capitals, because that's a good financial decision with the rates being so low.
Good, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, that being said, I would like to revisit the concept of a mobility/parking enterprise fund.
I would second that idea. I think when we discussed it, and it was rather briefly, I don't know, we had a compelling reason to go either way, so we didn't, and I think that was fine at the time. But in light of this, maybe it would make sense to have that, and forgive me, Nancy, I'm going to call it a parking enterprise fund. I guess I'd call it a mobility enterprise fund, and then we could build that up, and that might help us with financing when it comes to bonding, and with my limited understanding of that. And additionally, we could borrow from, if, let's say, we had a nice, healthy parking enterprise fund, I believe we could borrow from that to fund other things. So if we had an emergency sewer, water problem, whatever, that might be a little piggy bank where we'd have some acorns stashed away.
Right, you can borrow from an enterprise fund. You have to have it a payback certain period with an interest rate and everything. It's not for free, but you can definitely do it.
Okay. Other council comments? Judith?
This really isn't about the budget, but I'm going to throw it out anyway because you mentioned lease purchases. And I just want to encourage, because we talked about the 4 pillars of sustainability, in the future, I would like to see this city, when we look at lease purchasing vehicles, that we're really looking at purchasing electric vehicles and the infrastructure to sustain electric vehicles. It's time. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I think we've got some ideas here that we can kick around, particularly as we move into budget season. It seems to maybe I would ask council to think about the idea of, do we want to make a special effort, maybe not this year, but maybe to think about it for next year, to recommend there be some sort of economic development focus, or we look at what I guess I'd call the fragility or the limited focus of our economy, and is there any way we can sort of broaden that so that we're not held hostage to simply tourism or to simply marijuana? Thank you. So I guess, Becca, thank you very much. This was good.
Thank
Gives
you,
us
Robin.
something to- Yes, and thank you, Robin.
Thank
And
you,
Amy.
everyone. Yeah, thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
And thank you.
Okay, the next item, I-1, it's a discussion of COVID-19 and possible decision. And again, last week, I think everybody remembers we discussed this briefly with the idea that it was a rapidly changing situation and we'll revisit it periodically or weekly. So we have Elizabeth from the school district here tonight, Leslie from the Chamber of Commerce. I think they'd like to share their thoughts with us. So Elizabeth, could we start off with you? And Elizabeth, we'll need your full name and title, please.
Sure. Elizabeth Domingue, Superintendent of Schools of Manitou Springs School District. Well, just again, thanks for the time tonight and also last week. It's been a good time for us to have our staff back on campus. Everyone came back on Monday. Our principals and directors are having conversations, of course, as staff return to buildings. And also our staff are also asking some good questions about, what do protocols and procedures look like. So I also want to show appreciation to Denise and just her partnership. So, we had a vaccination clinic today at the high school, and that was about 42 folks participated in that clinic. And so that is, some may say that doesn't sound like a strong number, but it is, and we're excited about when that happens. So they're going to be back for the second dose on September 14th. And others can start their first dose on those dates. So that's where we are. We had our Board of Education meeting just last night and just continue to work towards continue to be in-person learning. So that's the updates I have, and just appreciate this opportunity. So strongly recommending mask, continue with our COVID intake. One question came up, and actually a parent is here tonight, and I don't know if I shared that. We do participate in the Binax testing. We've been doing that since probably February of last year. And the way that works, in the event that somebody is around someone who's been positive or symptomatic and we're not sure yet, and we have to quarantine, this is what happened last year, we have probably 3,000 Binax tests. And so in that situation, in order for someone to return to school, if they've been exposed, a student or staff member, We just asked them to complete that test. We've had high participation of folks when they're saying, in order to return back to school, then we'll do that. So I just want to clarify, because I don't think I shared that as one of our layers of protection last week when I met with you all. So just wanted to give you some of those updates, and thanks again.
Council, any questions for Elizabeth at this point? Julie?
Is that a written test? How do you spell it? I don't know what it is.
Oh, sorry, Binax. It's BINAX.
All right, well, I don't know what that is.
Sure. It's an antigen test, and so it's not a PCR test, but it is something that is a nasal swab. Yeah, the PCR is for us is important, but that antigen is more of a rapid test. I wasn't laughing at all. I think one thing to know is that the governor has also a Binax program, and we are signed up to participate in that. There's two different routes. There's the route where you kind of partner with an outside agency. You have to give student and staff information to that company. That's something that we don't feel comfortable doing at this point. The other alternative is you receive tests and that someone in the school district is able to do those. Those, at this point, have not been delivered. We still have our Binax from last year, and like I said, about 3,000, and those were provided by the governor's office. And those expire in November, so those should be in place. We would use those as the cases came up.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. I would say that I am loath to get into your business at the school. I think, my sense is you've got a good handle on it. However, you may or may not be aware that we have been getting feedback from parents, and I was wondering what feedback you've been getting from parents as well as students on masking.
I think from some families, I'd say, just kind of a rough estimate of approximate emails, maybe 14-ish. We did have a community meeting last week. Was that just last Thursday, I think? Wednesday. And we had about 67 folks participating in that virtual meeting, and some families who had emailed and also communicated, shared the similar concerns. But others saying, let it be a choice. And we're also saying, highly recommending. And so I think it's just dependent on a person's circumstance. So, if there was a different circumstance, we may hear from a different group of individuals. It's sort of how the last 2 years have been going. So I don't know, Nancy, if that helps a bit.
Yeah, it does. You have had some feedback, and I'm not hearing that there's a majority of the feedback that you've gotten has been pro-mask or anti-mask, or I should say pro-choice, not anti-mask.
I would say from like recent emails, that has been predominantly of those, let's say 10 to 14 have been around recommending making masks required. And so, but I also receive others of saying, let's continue with our protective layers. And then so I think that one of the emails that I sent out a couple weeks ago, and I've also kind of acknowledged it with our Board of Education, saying, in that email, it may not have come to be as clear of how much we're recommending these. And I think I might have shared with last week that last year, the executive order from the governor was mandated from 12 and older. And as a school district, we recommended mask wearing. And so they were not required last year, and we had a high participation rate. So that's where I'm looking forward to seeing our elementary schools on Friday when their students return. I know our principals and our staff have been having these conversations. And then also just, sometimes we'll get an email from a parent who says, can the teacher in that classroom really support my child's own mask wearing? And how can we do that in a respectful way to the child, where it's not shaming and it's not punitive, it's not like on a reward system, but really just making sure it feels safe. So I think there's a multitude of different approaches. There are also staff who say it's really hard to support mask wearing in kindergarten classes, let's say. But they've done a remarkable job. It's not that they're not supportive of that, and they'll continue to do that. So I think, Nancy, it's just dependent on an individual's perspective.
So I heard one reason why you don't want to mandate masks. Do you have other reasons why you don't want to mandate masks?
Which reason did I state to not mandate?
That for kindergarten teachers, it's hard to.
No, I wouldn't say that's not a reason for us to not mandate. For us as a school district right now, just looking at our local public health department is at this point recommending and not requiring. So that's really the sort of where we are right now. And as I said too, as we get into the school year, starting on Friday with students, as we see different circumstances, we can make those adjustments. For example, are there places where a mask is more appropriately worn and it needs to be worn, and so we can continue to do that. But it'll be important to see what participation is on Friday, to see how much just education that is important there. So I don't know if I cleared that up there.
To a degree, I'm just again concerned because we have been getting pressure, and so what I'm hearing is primarily you're following public health guidance at the county level.
That's right.
Okay,
That's
thanks.
right. And if that changes, we'll do that change, of course. That's not any, but that's really where we've been this whole time, is looking at our local public health. I got another report today. They're doing these weekly updates, and so thank you for clarifying that, because that is, you asked for some feedback from staff, and that is, they're just saying it is hard, and it's not that they're not going to do it. They did it all last year, and they'll continue to do that, I know, and do the things that we need to do. So thanks for asking that.
Thank you. Councilor Chandler?
Thank you, and thank you for coming back. So I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Fortune that we don't like to get into your business except for when there's a very serious public health issue. And so for that reason, I think it is really prudent for us to have these conversations. I'm going to make a few comments, and then I have a question for you. I believe in really being proactive and not reactive. And I want us to all think about before we had vaccines. Remember, before we had a vaccine, wash your hands, socially distance, and wear a mask. Okay. Well, now we have a vaccine, but children 12 and over don't have a vaccine. And I'm worried about that. While I think it's prudent that the El Paso County is strongly recommending masks, I happen to have the statistics right in front of me. I check it every day. As of the 16th of August, there were 394 cases in the last week and 6 deaths. I really don't want a trigger to be a child gets COVID here in Manitou. So I support the American Academy of Pediatrics that clearly states that they highly recommend masks for children in school because they are the most vulnerable at this point. So that said, we have a Delta variant now, and we'll probably have other variants. That looks like the trajectory of this COVID. Why? Because people haven't been wearing masks and getting vaccinated, and that's just how it is. So the more people we get vaccinated and the more people that wear masks, the faster we're going to get a hold of this, which we have not yet. My question to you, having said that, is what would it take to trigger you to have your staff and students wear masks? I would like to know that answer.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the health department looking at hospitalizations of school-age children, and we don't want any child or any adult to be in the hospital. That's been our whole work for the last, I say, it hasn't been 18 months for us at schools. It's been 3 years. And we're starting the third impacted year. And so what we know now is very different. I've always said too, I do not know as an educator, and I don't think any of us can know exactly what someone does when they're not with us. And so there's a lot of responsibility that comes in this whole time frame. And I say that because, at this point, the metrics that our local health department is speaking to is hospitalization rates of 0 to 17. And so I think that's something that we really want to pay attention to. Of course, I'd like it to be 0. And so I think that's something that we'll continue to look at. I'm constantly in contact with our health department. I called them today, and so just making sure that we're all on the same page with these aspects. So I think that's just something, some districts are doing some other things, but to just share that with you now.
So based on what you just said to me, what would trigger you is more children getting hospitalized and
just
with
feedback.
COVID?
No.
Because I'm hearing that that's what,
No, just
that you're
feedback.
watching hospital rates. I think that if we mandate masks now, that's the best thing we have for our children to
I
make
don't
sure
want
they.
any child in. I've never wanted them in the hospital, and I want to be really aware that I don't know if there's ever a great answer in any situation, but I can tell you that we're not opposed to mask wearing. We're highly supportive. We've been supportive of mask wearing, and that's what we're going to continue to do and model that for others. I'm just saying that this is a metric that our health department is providing us. So 0 children is the goal. It will always be the goal. And our health department is able to see what is going on in a way that I don't have access to. That is their responsibility to us.
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to wrap my head
Yeah.
around that.
I understand.
That we have children 12 and under that have no vaccine. We have no vaccine for them. And the hospitalizations nationwide are our children with the Delta variant, which is highly contagious. And so I guess my last question to you, and then I'll open it up to other counselors having a chance to ask you questions, is why not masks? I mean, what's the big problem with having kids? Versus them getting COVID. What's the worst thing about wearing a mask? Which is why you're only recommending it.
Yeah, there is no problem with masks. That's where we're going to continue to work with our health department. I think some of the work that Denise and I are also saying in partnership with the city council, you all have also a responsibility. We have a responsibility with our Board of Education and just continuing to monitor the circumstance. Again, I would never want anyone to think that I or anyone in our school district is okay with any child being in the hospital for any reason. And so I just want to make sure that that is very clear. That has been our work and our challenge for now starting the 3rd year of this in schools. And I appreciate that, but if at any point my care for kids is ever questioned, that would be unfortunate, because that's really the opposite of what everything we've done has been to really support children in schools and staff in schools in a safe way. But I can tell you that I've appreciated our partnership. I think it's important. I think it's understanding that that we're working together for these solutions and really modeling healthy and productive conversations around it. But no child in the hospital is our goal. My goal, I know it's everyone else's here too.
So
And-
I just want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So if your trigger is one child getting COVID and being in the hospital in D14.
I would say that it's not my trigger. It's me with the Board of Education. This is a very complex issue, and
It is. It's a
and
very
so-
complex
so-
issue. I don't want any child in D14
Yeah.
to get COVID-19 on my watch.
Yeah, neither do I.
And I want to go on record
Yeah,
for that.
Yeah, definitely. I have been doing the same. I know our Board of Education, I know our principals. I think what's important is that no, I don't know of a single person who wants anybody to have COVID, and that's what we have to fight for. So what we'll continue to do is communicate with you all, continue to work with our Board of Education, but I think that's kind of the responses I have for
I'm
you.
going to hog the microphone one more minute, because I did listen in on the school board yesterday regarding your COVID, and it was one interesting discussion I'll bring up was someone brought up what do we do about bullying? And, if children are bullying each other for wearing or not wearing a mask, and I guess my answer to that is make everyone wear a mask, and then you won't have that issue. And the other thing I want to remind you is that one of the things we didn't have in 2020 when we wore masks was we didn't have the flu. And so now we're possibly looking at a robust flu season and the Delta variant. So just
Thank you.
I've said enough.
Thanks, Judith. I appreciate you.
Okay, thank you. John, do you have any questions for Elizabeth or comments?
Yeah, I was curious because I've been watching kind of the countywide incident level. So I kind of want to go over some of these numbers because the last part of July, we were at 144 per 100,000. Okay, this week we're at 167. If you follow that trend line, next week we'll be at 190. And by the 1st of September, we'll arrive at over 200. So are any of those sort of trigger points in which you would ask for universal masking in the schools?
I would say that nothing's off the table at all around what an opportunity is. It can also look different for different grade levels. It can look different for different class cohorts. So I think what's important is that this is again a specific number, a specific trigger is very complex. With our Board of Education and local public health, will continue to monitor that.
Okay.
As we have, and I think some of the things that any time this city said there's going to be a mask mandate, that was the way we followed through. You all have sometimes some different information, but I just share that with you, John. Thanks.
Okay. And I think I chatted with you today, and you said that you had some of these numbers that were coming, which were essentially your vaccination rate amongst your employees and your staff, and obviously the vaccination rate of essentially the 12-year-olds and above. And you said that you'd maybe be having that in the next week or so?
Yeah, it just depends on what that back frame looks like. It's not an easy, accessible, repository of these things. So it's just a matter of getting those. Also, it's always kind of tricky too. You have a student from out of state. They took a vaccine in a different state. It doesn't necessarily speak to that, but we can have some estimates. That's what I'll get to our Board of Education as soon as we have some good numbers. Yeah, thanks for asking that, John. The staff is a little different. We have rough estimates from last year, and we have new staff from this year, and so we'll get some more information as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Natalie, any questions for Elizabeth? How about you, Steve?
Well, I guess I don't have any questions per se, but
Steve,
Mike.
can you move closer? Please, thank you.
I guess I have some comments that might come later when we talk about COVID. The Delta variant, I was listening to a health expert on a recent podcast, and he cited statistics saying that prior to the Delta variant, there were about 1 in 15 fully vaccinated people that were getting COVID. Maybe not going in the hospital, but they were getting COVID and passing along. Now it's 1 out of every 9 people that are fully vaccinated that are getting COVID and passing along. And they're passing along in higher transmission rates. So we're at a situation now similar to when COVID first appeared. And I think we can all remember when San Francisco said, okay, everybody's got to stay at home, we're shutting down the city. It was very early in the pandemic. There were maybe just a few thousand cases and maybe 100 deaths in the United States at the time. we were all alarmed. I was alarmed. It was like, what? They're shutting down the city? But they were right, because they were anticipating what's happening. And that's where I think we are right now. School's getting ready to start. It could explode with school. I saw recently that there was a county in Georgia where they had to shut down the entire school, all the schools in that county, because COVID was just going rampant. And I think the situation is where we have either vaccinated people or parents who are not vaccinated. Their kids come to school, they're not wearing a mask, and they pass it along rapidly to the other kids. So I think an abundance of caution is in order right now, and I would I'm very much in favor of mask mandate.
Can I make a comment there? You know, if we knew that there was an isolation of transmission only in schools, that's one, but that's not the reality. And so I think this is such a complex conversation in that a lot of things happen outside of the school. And so when folks are wearing a mask in some places and not wearing it somewhere else, it is such a different perspective. And I think that is the dilemma that schools are really in, is that they're not wearing masks everywhere else, potentially. Maybe some are, but not in a extensive way as we were last year. And I think that's a very different conversation. And that is the reality that we as schools don't want to see this at all. Trust me, we're talking about the impact on students, on wellness, suicide rates, depression, hospitalization due to depression and anxiety. We saw increases in those areas. And so I think that all of us due diligently have to look at this as a comprehensive approach to making sure that we make those numbers go down together. And I think that's something to really acknowledge in this conversation, that schools are put in a different space oftentimes than other aspects. And I just needed to share that. That's not in this context. I just mean in general.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Okay, great. Elizabeth, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I think what we'll do now is we'll ask Leslie Lewis from the chamber to address us. Elizabeth,
I just want to add one thing. Again, appreciate each of you. I would also, it's me speaking, but we also have a Board of Education too that I know in previous years we have sat around a round table and had conversations. I really hope that this City Council and our Board of Education can be seen solving these problems together in really productive and positive ways. So I would ask that if that is something that this council is interested in, I'm certain that our Board of Education would be interested in doing the same and modeling that for other communities that may not actually have that opportunity. And we do get to do that because Manitou is such a special city. So just wanted to share that.
okay, all right, thank you very much. Yeah. Leslie, if we could hear from you, and then I think we're also going to want to hear from Kelly, I believe, our HR person, get the city's perspective. So, Leslie, if you'll kind of give us the Chamber of Commerce business community and your take on it.
Okay, Leslie Lewis, Executive Director, Manitou Springs Chamber of Commerce. So last week, Councilor Chandler had asked how many businesses would be more comfortable having a mandate in place. And so I was able
Leslie, can you move it closer? Sorry, I just want to make sure everybody can hear. Thank you.
Certainly. I was able to speak with 81 businesses, and out of those, 60 said no, please don't. 20 said yes, and 1 said undecided. And the 2 biggest reasons that the ones who don't want a mandate don't want it is because that leaves it to their employees to enforce. And last year they had such a negative experience. 1 told me he was assaulted 3 times physically. Lots of employees were verbally assaulted. So they don't want to go through that again. So if they're the ones to enforce it, they prefer it not. Some of the ones that do want it are the ones that are on the fence in requiring it in their business. And we do have 4 businesses currently that do require everyone to wear a mask. The other reason was because they're already seeing business quieting down, which it always does this time of year. And so they don't want to drive away the additional business by requiring people to come in masks. So those are the two primary reasons. Then talking to Councilor Shada on Friday, he asked if I could find out vaccination rates. And so I asked those same questions. So out of the 81 businesses, what I found out was only 2 had vaccination rates of under 50%, 49 and lower. 12 were between 50 and 75%. 18 were 75% to 99%. 22 were 100%. And then 27 of them chose not to answer the question or didn't know the answer. Sometimes I was talking to an employee, not an owner, and some of the owners even were not asking. So that's kind of where those businesses are. 11 businesses haven't responded to the messages I left to call back. So I may still gather more information going forward.
Could you send us that data? I don't need to know what businesses, I just want to know the total numbers.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
I will type it up and get it to you tomorrow.
Okay. Julie?
When the businesses said that they were uncomfortable being forced to enforce the law themselves, what does that mean? Does that mean they called the police and the police refused to come? Or they didn't feel like calling the police because they thought they should just try to enforce it themselves? Or can you elaborate?
Well, I think their enforcement is somebody walks through the door without a mask and they say, excuse me, you have to have a mask to come in. It's a mandate. And the customer either argues, and yes, sometimes the police were called, not always. And sometimes the customer would get belligerent and then leave. So.
Leslie, did you have more, or just you want to entertain questions now?
I would be happy to entertain other questions.
Okay. And any other questions from council? I guess not.
Great. Well,
Leslie?
thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry. Well, I was going to hear from, our next time we're going to have Kelly. Kelly, if you want to come forward. So we'll have her, and then we could ask a general question if you're if council's agreeable.
Mayor, and Kelly's really just going to talk about the processes that we're currently using, the procedure that we're using for our staff.
Okay.
So that you know that. And then Councilor Shada asked for vaccination rates. We haven't asked for that with our staff, and so I would ask Jeff to give his perspective legally what we can and cannot do, just as you do that. So she's really just talking about the process that we're using currently with our staff, and then Jeff can answer the question about vaccination rates.
Okay, so we'll hear from Kelly and then from Jeff.
Good evening. I think most of the numbers have been talked about tonight as far as new cases and hospitalizations, et cetera. I did want to give you an update as far as what we're doing with our employees. Of course, we mandated the masks in all city buildings and vehicles with more than 2 people, or 2 or more people. We're having them complete the daily self-certifications, taking their temperatures, and then going through for the symptoms, and then each person is self-certifying, and it is a form that they fill out that we're keeping track of. Then we have also, I've sent out the notice, if you're feeling ill, if you have these symptoms, these are the things that you should be doing, going to the doctors, getting tested, et cetera. We are encouraging vaccinations. We're in the process right now of working on a vaccination van here at City Hall. And we're monitoring the local, regional, state infection rates, hospitalizations, trying to get a good grasp on that. So it's been basically everyone has been wearing masks and doing the daily questionnaires, and we haven't really had any problems with that thus far.
And then I guess I will let Jeff respond to the vaccination mandates or checking, et cetera.
I was sorry. I was asked two different questions. I think one of them is, can you get vaccination information from your employees so you know who's vaccinated and who's not? And the answer to that is yes, because it's basically information that's related to the safety of the workplace. And, that's still medical information that needs to be kept confidential for the individual employees, but it can be maintained by your HR department. And then, you can basically, HR can share with city council, just sort of aggregate vaccine rates of the employees, so you can have an idea of what your entity's vaccine rate is, and make decisions based on that. And then, that's the first question I think I was asked. Second question is, can you impose like a vaccination mandate on all employees? And the general answer appears to be yes, with, you have to have exceptions for health reasons and religious reasons, but you can generally impose that because it's a significant danger to the workplace safety. It's not 100% clear in the law because it's only approved for emergency use at this point, and there's some question as to whether or not a vaccine mandate as a condition of employment is enforceable for emergency use vaccines, but I don't think that the law actually prevents such a mandate even for emergency use authorizations. It's just not 100% clear. And so I think that the short answer is yes, but there still are arguments to be made to the contrary. I guess, just to sort of follow up on that, this isn't really a legal issue, but I know that there are employers and there are governmental employers who are now imposing a vaccine mandate. And some of them have the other option of, if you don't get vaccinated, you have to wear a mask and you have to be tested regularly. So there's some other options if you don't want to go to a full mandate, just for you to consider. So that's pretty much a short answer to a complicated question.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Well,
He did, okay, all right, cool, great. Okay, council, questions for Kelly or Jeff?
Can I just say, we're monitoring, right? We're really watching, because when is the point where we may close City Hall and we do by visits only like we did before? And those are the things we're just monitoring daily, like I did previously. Whenever I say, okay, we've got to close it, it's time that we just do by appointment, we send people home. So we're continuing to monitor this. I don't say that I have a trigger point right now set, but we're watching it closely as we go forward.
Thank you. Kelly, thank you. Jeff, thanks. Okay, Councilor Chandler?
One of the things that I find difficult, even though I'm frequently perusing the El Paso County website for this information, is specific zip codes, the incidence of new cases per zip code. And so what I would like to see on a weekly basis is for council to have that information emailed to us, new cases per our zip code, so that we can take a look at that. Is that something that can be done?
Yeah, part of that is on the website by the 80829, and it shows, right, so you can watch it. In the immunization, you saw what I got and was able to do it. So I can reach out to the health department and see what they can provide and see if they can get that to us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see in the audience we have some other folks who've stayed here to address this topic. I'm just wondering if council doesn't have any objections, if we have other members of the audience who'd like to make brief statements on this, I think maybe it would be appropriate to do that. Kelly, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this? It'd be a very brief comment, okay. So I guess we'll do ladies first.
Mayor, so I did receive from one person a speaker sign-in sheet on the subject, so.
Okay, let's start with that person then. Who is that?
And that is Angela Carr.
Okay, if you'd come forward, please. Okay, so if you give us your full name and address, and then if you could keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Okay, all right.
Hi, my name is Angela Carr, and my address is not in Manitou. I'm not a Manitou resident. I'm right outside on 36th Street, 131 North 36th Street. I do have 3 kids in Manitou Springs School Districts. They're healthy and doing well. We are looking for real estate in Manitou, which is difficult right now, but I am not a resident as of yet, and I hate to put anybody on the hot spot or question anybody's decisions. I am so thankful for the leadership and guidance that my kids have had in their education. It means, yeah, that alone means so much to me, but I'm having a hard time accepting the fact that our kids cannot speak for themselves, and the fact that there's some people of a different demographic than I am from that might not do as well if they catch COVID. And we know some of these children, and it's hard for me to understand why we can't do everything we can to protect these kids. I wrote El Paso County Health, and they got back to me today, and I think what I'm confused about right now is I'm hearing from the district that they're waiting for El Paso County Health to give them guidance on what to do, but El Paso County Health wrote me back and said, while we hear your concerns about establishing and requiring strict minimum safety standards for public schools, it is up to each district and school to create their own operational plans to mitigate the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the COVID-19 disease that it causes. And then they actually went on and said I could share with the district the AAP guidelines and the Children's Hospital guidelines, which are to wear masks for children 2 and older. So my concern is that if they are wanting the districts to make decisions, and the districts are wanting the county to make decisions, we don't have anybody making decisions for the people in our community who can't make decisions for themselves. And we are seeing record cases of hospitalizations. Now, a new study today from Canada came out and said that with the new Delta variant, kids are twice as more likely to contract COVID and be sick from it. Another study is showing hospitalizations are now greater in Colorado than they were a year ago today. And I just feel like a year ago today we had so many restrictions in place, and now we have none. And it's very concerning just as a community member, and I feel like in Manitou, one thing that has always drawn me to it is that we try and take care of our whole community. And if we're not taking care of our most vulnerable and our weakest part, I don't feel like we're doing as good of a job as we can. And I just wanted to speak out in support of a mask mandate for schools.
Okay, thank you. Next, please.
Hello and good evening. My name is Darcy Hurlbert. Address is 202 Chelton Road here in Manitou. I, too, am a parent of 3 school-aged children, 12, 9, and 4. My 12-year-old is fully vaccinated, was 48 hours after it was approved. Unfortunately, as we all know, my 9 and 4-year-old are unable to get the vaccine at this time, but I guarantee that they will be first or second in line when it is approved. But in the meantime, I would love to send them to school. My preschooler goes to school here in Manitou Springs, and my 4th grader will as well. I did keep them home for last year during COVID, mostly because I could. I work from home full-time as well as my husband, and felt I had the resources to provide to my kids and reduce the burden on the school district. But it's time for them to go back, and we all know that a simple way to keep them safe would be for a mandatory mask mandate. I hate that the decision is on Dr. Domain. I can't imagine the burden that she is bearing. I have exercised other paths, such as speaking at the Board of Education meeting last night, writing several letters, including to Governor Polis. And seemingly nobody in Colorado right now wants to make the decision except for a handful of districts that have made the decision for mask mandates. So I don't know what or if you have a role as council, but if you do, would implore that if making a city mandate made it possible to keep our schools' children safe, I would love to see that entertained. Just in closing, I am a public health professional, have been in public health for 20 years, and Council Judith would just emphasize the fact, and thank you for your comments around prevention. Prevention is everything. And there's a saying that we like to say in public health about drinking downstream from the herd, and we're not that in Manitou Springs. I know that we're leaders and we don't necessarily conform, and would encourage us that if we have the possibility to make a difference in our children's lives here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do I see another hand up? Mr. Smith?
Evening, Council. Name's Gary Smith, live 450 Crystal Hills Boulevard. I am a school board member, and we have, sitting here listening to this tonight, it just seems to me, and as Elizabeth brought up, that I think it needs to go back to, you guys are an elected board, we're an elected board, that somewhere we need to sit down, have a meeting together so that we're all going in the same direction and we're not basically hearing something on the news of how things are happening. Our other thing is that with our administrative staff, we are kept as a board totally up to date daily, sometimes twice daily, of what's going on, how things are happening. And I think that the school district is doing everything they can to make the kids as safe as they can possibly do. And I would hope that we could have some more conversation on this before a decision is made. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Anybody else? Okay. Council, I think it's up to us to discuss this now. Anybody want to start off? Steve?
Yeah, I've been just perusing the New York Times just now, and right now, there are indoor mask mandates in the following locations: Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Hawaii, Louisiana, Oregon, Puerto Rico, Chicago, and New Mexico. Chicago and New Mexico decided today, and they're going to implement that indoor mask mandate starting Friday. The rest of the locations already had implemented it very recently because of the COVID Delta right now. So that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at, as I mentioned before, an exponential rise in cases. And I think we're going to have to act.
Thank you. Anyone else? Judith? Judith? Did you ever hand up Nancy? Okay, well, Nancy then, and then Judith. Nancy?
Yeah, this is a very challenging dilemma for me, as it is for, I think, most people. I, quite honestly, do not feel ready to impose any mandates at all. I would feel a hell of a lot more comfortable if the school were to have enforced mandates. But I want to respect the school board as well, because I know a bunch of people on it and I have a great deal of respect for them. I think we know so much more than we did a year ago. And on the other hand, we know so little about what's coming. So anyway, bottom line is I'm just not prepared tonight to act on anything. If I'm called upon to do it, I will obviously have to, but I'm glad we have this on our agenda for the next 2 meetings. I am prepared to change on a dime if when I say that we've learned so much more than we did a year ago, part of that is that local it's a local issue as well. It's not just national statistics. I think it would maybe be appropriate for us to write El Paso County Department of Public Health and say, hey, you know, you're not really helping us here very much that we can determine. So I don't know. I'm really, 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 really challenged by this. And I'm also, my background, I said, is in public health, and it really, I don't know if it's because of that or in spite of that I'm so challenged by this. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Chandler, you were next.
I'm not at all challenged by it. I remember sitting in a council meeting in Chambers in February, and we were just starting to talk about COVID. What's this COVID thing? And I'm a nurse. I've been through a number of issues like this, number of pandemics, you know, HIV, SARS. I remember saying in a council meeting, we are going to all be wearing masks before this is over. And I got a lot of blowback from it. And here we are. And I think I'm gonna mention something that Dr. Domain said, which I think is like, you made the perfect case for wearing masks at school with the last comment you made, and that was, we don't know where our kids are when they're not at school. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know what their parents doing. But you know what? If you mandated masks at school, you'd know that they were wearing masks at school. So if and when you do get a COVID case of a child that's not vaccinated, you can pretty much be, you know, feel pretty good that it didn't happen at school. So I don't know, if I was in your shoes, I'd probably feel pretty good about that. I'm fine making moving forward with a mandate. However, if it is not the consensus of council tonight to do so, I would like us to at least leave tonight with some kind of metric, some kind of line in the sand of, if this happens, this triggers a mask mandate. For example, the data that Councilor Shada presented. I mean, I'd like a clear idea of what's it going to take before we talk about this next week, in the interim week, that would trigger this happening. And I also have a question for Jeff Parker. As much as I would hate to impose a mask mandate on a school district, I don't even know if we have the legal authority to do that in the case of a serious health crisis.
Right. Well,
Do we? That's a.
So there's no provision in any statute or law that says the city council has the authority to impose a mask mandate. It's not express. But there are a lot of sources of authority the city has. One is the home rule powers. The other is statutory powers to protect the public health from disease and other serious safety issues, which would include COVID. So I believe the city council does have the authority to do that. I believe City and County of Denver has done this. But I generally would advise you that if you're going to impose a mask mandate, that it be generally applicable to indoor spaces in the city, not just try to target the school. Now, there are, you know, with any legal issue, there's going to be nuances to it, and the question is going to come up, you know, how much authority does the city as a home rule jurisdiction and with statutory authority have over another governmental entity with its own authority? But I believe you have a strong argument that you could impose a mask mandate that's generally applicable throughout the city that would apply to the school as well.
So I would like to hear from other council members that if we don't move forward tonight with a mandate, what metric would we use to impose one in the near future or by next week if we see numbers change?
Okay, thank you. Councilman Shada?
Yes, I would really like to commend our city staff and our leadership for moving ahead with a unified mask order for all indoor spaces and automobiles. I think that's astounding leadership, and I want to thank you, Denise and Roy, if you both made that together or whether you made it individually. Ms. Howell, I want to thank you. I would like to know, since I think we've got clear guidance from the city attorney and with our HR director, that we immediately collect on a weekly basis as the city our vaccination rate of all our eligible employees. And I believe they're all eligible because I don't think, the last I checked, we have any less than 12-year-olds on the payroll. Okay? And, you know, obviously I don't want a list of names. I just want to know the rate and whether we're moving the ball in that direction. So that would be my tepid proposal in terms of for the city. I think some of the speakers spoke about essentially what I call the elephant in the room, which is the county health department is saying it's a local issue, and local people are saying it is the county health. And this is round and round, and we need to stop this. And I would like to challenge everybody in this room to step forward, okay, and stop this spinning, okay? All right? We can control here. We cannot control what's going down in county health, okay? So we can either lead or we can play this spinning game, okay? And I just want to talk about the elephant in the room. I think there's a huge elephant in the room in terms of spinning around, okay? Second off, I totally agree with Mr. Smith that I think that along about September 1st, especially if these rates continue to go up by 13 and 15% every week, I think we do need to convene possibly a joint session so we get all on the same sheet of paper and have an adult discussion about this, okay? I am happy with how it seems like in my grid that we're starting to kind of fill in the spaces here and get on the same sheet of paper. Where do we sit as a zip code? Where do we sit as a city? Okay? And it seems like in my discussions with the school superintendent that we're going to have fairly granular information about the staff or grade level cohort or age cohort. And I think that metrics and whatnot, we ought to be driven by that. Okay, and I think we desperately need to know what those things are. And I understand the startup of collecting that and getting that system going takes time to get that process going in HR and school nurses and all that other kind of stuff. So, so that would be my particular motion tonight, that the council ask the staff to begin reporting to us on a weekly basis about our staff's vaccination rate. I'm very happy with the leadership we've shown on the universal masking, and I cannot thank the staff enough for that. Thank you. That's a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Okay. Any further discussion on this? John, you want to restate that just for?
Yeah, my motion would be that basically the city begin collecting on a weekly basis our vaccination rate of our staff. So we just need to have a percentage, okay? We're not collecting names, we're not marking anybody, we're not doing any kind of thing like that. And I understand that that's a possibility that we could start doing that because we're asking those questions, right, in that survey, and we could probably augment that, correct? Can you come forward, please, and just let me know whether there are, I want to know what the problems and pros and cons of doing this.
Really, there's none. It's fairly simple. We can build a template so that we can send out a questionnaire every week to check the vaccinations. Of course, once we get them the first time, we won't need them the second unless they're new people getting vaccinated. That is not part of the current questionnaire. That current questionnaire goes over symptoms, et cetera. So this would be outside, but it'd be very simple to do. So we can definitely get these numbers for you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Does anybody need to have John restate his motion for clarity, or are we good with it? Sounds like we're good with it. Any further discussion? Okay.
Can I just clarify, can we do this as a self-reporting instead of getting vaccine, the thing? Because
Absolutely.
that becomes a HIPAA, what can we can't.
Yeah,
Could we
can we
just do
start with a
self-reporting?
voluntary thing?
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
And can we get a report back about what the percentage is responding back so that we know whether voluntary compliance is only 5%?
Yeah, and we're going to have to really look at this in the aspect that, like, for instance, we may have volunteers or part-timers that we're not that are not working right now. So give us a couple of days to really work through what
I
this looks like.
understand the startup.
And go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Can I make another motion?
Actually, John, I'd be okay with that, but I'd like to give Natalie the opportunity to speak. I think we've gone around, and I think Julie may have.
Okay.
I'll check my notes. I think we need to.
I can go last.
Yeah, let's give Natalie and Julie a chance to speak, and then we'll come back, okay?
And my concern in terms of Natalie speaking before she speaks, and I don't mean to be rude, but I'd like to know from the attorney if it's appropriate for her to participate in this discussion whatsoever, since she's already on the school board and she's not resigned from the school board.
Well, it's basically an administrative issue. So I
Jeff,
guess
can you get a little closer to the mic?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically an administrative issue for city council, so it's up to Natalie. She feels like she can handle the matter in an unbiased fashion. So it's really her choice if she thinks she has a conflict that would bias her unfairly for either of her rules.
Okay. Julie, do you?
That was my only concern. I wasn't sure how that worked because it just didn't seem right.
Okay. Well, Natalie, if you'd like to go ahead, you can express your opinion. Certainly, that's not a big deal. I mean, it is, but.
Okay. Well, I'm also looking at, for whatever reason, September 1st is sort of a date to potentially implement something. I am certainly looking at things citywide when we discuss this issue as a council. And, there's other things coming, FDA approval. And I'm also, again, the weather. I think it's really important that we recognize that right now kids can go outside for classes, that businesses can prop open their doors, and that as the weather gets colder, I think we need to seriously look into what that means in terms of ventilation and other situations. So I did pretty much, I felt pretty good about everything that you had stated, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Julie?
I don't know if there's any support for this, but I'd like to look at and make a motion to impose a mask mandate on the public schools and all the businesses in town effective immediately. And we can certainly rescind that and modify it or completely terminate it once we get some good data about our vaccination rates if we so decide. But for now, today, I think that's the right thing to do, effective whenever is practicable, perhaps, effective Monday, so that people have a few days to get used to the idea.
I'll second.
Okay, so Julie, would you restate your motion, please? Just.
I move that starting Monday, whatever that date is, the people inside buildings in Manitou that are school buildings and businesses be required to wear masks while they're indoors until
Okay.
further notice.
Okay, so a motion and seconded by Counselor Chandler. Any further discussion?
Can I ask the city attorney in terms of, is that enough?
Yeah, I was going to make a comment, is that you did have a indoor mask mandate in place previously, and it was written and it had some pretty good details about exactly how it applied, who it applied to, what the exceptions were. And so I think it would probably be my suggestion that you have something in writing so it actually is clear as to how it works, because that general motion wouldn't, it applies to everybody. It would basically not exempt children, it wouldn't exempt health reasons, and you had that in your last written motion, resolution imposing that mandate. So what I would suggest is that if council wants to put that in place, perhaps you could make the motion to direct the city administrator to impose the same or similar mandate that was imposed before, and that could actually be put in writing, and then it would be her who actually imposed it in the next day versus just an oral motion that's really hard to enforce and follow.
So is that basically where I would modify the motion to say I incorporate by reference the details of the prior mask mandate order?
Right.
Would that do the trick? And then we can spell it out once we get the prior
Right,
language.
and basically, I guess, here's how I would frame the motion, it would be a motion to impose the same mask mandate that you imposed previously and make it clear that it applies to the local schools, and have the city administrator basically publish that in writing tomorrow. And then I could basically use the same one you used before, and maybe tweak it so it's actually clear that it applies to the schools, and it would basically be the same in all their circumstances, in all their other aspects.
The schools and the businesses.
Right.
Yeah.
Because your last mandate actually applied to public indoor spaces. So it was broader than
So
just
that's a
schools
better
and
way to
businesses.
word it,
Right.
public indoor spaces.
Yeah, yeah.
And that includes schools as well as businesses.
We could make it clear that it does.
And since the word indoor is there, then obviously it wouldn't apply when kids are out on the playground or outside for any reason, correct?
That's correct. And
Oh, well,
that-
then that's my motion, what he said.
Okay, and while you're actually, before you vote, I could actually, I'm just gonna pull it up really quickly, so you have, I've got it right here, yeah. I've got my last draft copy, which I believe is I think it's the same version you approved, or almost identical. Let me just quickly, so, just so you know what you're actually directing, it basically imposes, every person shall wear a face covering when entering or moving within any public indoor space. And then it basically includes, you shall wear a face covering in such other public indoor, and it says, or outdoor spaces where such person is unable to maintain safe social distancing at least 6 feet or more from others, not of a person's household. So it would include public indoor space and then public outdoor spaces where you can't maintain social distancing. This is what you had last time. And then it basically defines what a mask is. And then it basically requires all businesses to require face coverings within their public indoor spaces and place a sign informing the public of the requirement. And then it has a number of exceptions, which were similar to the state exceptions that they had when they had a statewide mask mandate. I'm just going to list them for you, because I think it's important for you to actually hear what they are. Persons under the age of 10, persons who cannot medically tolerate a face covering, persons who are receiving a personal service where the temporary removal of a face covering is necessary, persons eating or drinking at an establishment with food service when seated for dining, persons who are exercising alone or with others from the individual's household, and a face covering would interfere with the activity, persons who enter a business or receive services and are asked to temporarily remove the face covering for identification purposes.
Jeff, can you talk into the speaker?
Sorry.
Kiss it, just put it on your mouth.
Yeah, I got it. I've never been accused of talking quietly, but this is better. Individuals who are hearing impaired or otherwise disabled, or who are communicating with someone who is hearing impaired or otherwise disabled, and where the ability to see the mouth is essential. I got 3 more for you, then we'll be done. Individuals who are actively engaged in a public safety role, which includes law enforcement, firefighters, and the like. Individuals who are officiating at a religious service, or individuals who are giving a speech for broadcast or an audience. So that's the general gist of the actual order. And it was actually an order that was imposed, I believe, at city council direction, but it was imposed by the mayor and city administrator back in July of last year. So that would be, my suggestion would be to use basically the same order. And the only thing that I've got in here, I've heard you loud and clear that you wanted to apply to the schools. And I think that the public indoor space definition includes schools, but I would suggest just adding that if that's what you want to be clear about.
Well, adding that, and also, so I would like to add that, and I'd also like to modify the age under 10 to be under 5, because we've got 5-year-olds in kindergarten. So under 5 exemption.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, and I might add that Steve just showed me that today apparently Denver City Council decided to impose a mask mandate on all of their public schools.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just ask when you would want this imposed? You gotta give me a little bit of time to get everything put together.
My
so-
motion was Monday. Is
Okay,
that-
thank you.
Yeah, I figured that's enough.
Thank you.
Okay, Natalie?
I have a question about the outdoor spaces. Do we feel comfortable with that masking if you're outside and can't socially distance from 6 feet?
I think that would be like if kids have to, which is hard to imagine why they would have to, but like say you had to like stand in line, touching the person in front of you in a small little space, getting ready to board a bus or something.
I was
you
thinking
know.
more of our downtown.
Yeah, but the language was if you can't really separate from other people.
Right,
I
so
guess
we
if
would
you're downtown,
enforce-
you can always jump and walk in the middle of the street or something. I don't know. We're just pertaining to indoors, so this
That's what-
doesn't pertain to
okay.
sidewalks.
That was included, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it would be any other outdoor space where you can't maintain 6 feet of separation.
Okay, okay. I
That's the
stand
way it said,
corrected.
that's what it said last time. I'm not saying you have to do it this time. It's just
No,
what-
I get it. I hear you.
Mr. Shada.
Counselor Wolf, I will support your motion as long as we modify it to make outdoor spaces be generally safe. Okay?
Blair, okay, I will modify my motion to exclude outdoor spaces, and I guess the question is if I still have my second.
Yes, you do. Second.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a
Can we-
second.
Mayor, can we get that clarification on that motion? Because it is not clear.
Okay.
So I guess my suggestion would be to direct the city administrator to impose a new emergency order as discussed tonight, and which basically would be similar to the last order, except that it would have an exemption for those under age 5, not age 10. Add a clarification that it applies to schools, and then exclude outdoor spaces from it would not include outdoor spaces as part of the mask mandate. And it would start Monday.
Nancy?
Could I recommend that we make it start next Wednesday so that we have a chance to review this next Tuesday night?
You don't have, next Tuesday is not an action item, so you're going to have to do a special
We could
meeting.
make it an action item we could make it a meeting next week.
You would have to do a special meeting.
I'm not interested in modifying my motion.
Okay. Okay, we've got, I guess, yeah, okay. What, John?
City Clerk, is that clear? I just want to make sure
Yes.
you're happy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's much clearer. Thank you.
Okay, well,
I'm not sure I made it clear.
I guess before we go to a vote, I'm kind of torn in a way. I think this is the right thing to do, but I also think that the proposal of letting the school district have jurisdiction over their students and over their activities is important. I would, I have second thoughts about the motion as it is for that reason, although I think it's well-intentioned. This is a difficult situation, so I'm just kind of laying it out there. Judith?
I hope this is the shortest time we have to do this. But the thing is, the only reason we would continue this is if the numbers tell us we need to. So please know that our goal is to keep you, your families, and your children safe. And so, I'll be the first one to be the cheerleader if in 2 weeks we go, no more mask mandate, but I really feel in my heart of hearts it's the right thing, and I certainly don't mind being the bad guy here, when you have to go home and say, gosh, that darn council, they're making us wear masks. I am reassured with Denver. And I really do believe that the media is going to say, you know what, Manitou, cutting edge, once again, got out in front of it and did the right thing.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Just like we were looking for triggers to put in a mask mandate, which we don't have, what would the triggers be to take it off?
I don't think we need to talk about that now, and I'd like to call the question.
Okay, technically calling a question means we take a vote to see if we're going to take a vote.
That's what I mean.
Okay? Okay. I think
we
what you want
vote
us to
if
take
we
a
take
vote.
a vote?
Calling the question means we all vote, and if 2/3 of us, in other words, 5 of us vote, then we'll stop discussion, and then we'll vote. Okay?
Oh,
So
thank
call
you
the
for
question. Okay?
clarifying.
So the motion is to call the question. All in favor of calling the question, say aye. I said we're not actually voting on the issue. We're voting on whether we'll vote to have the issue. Okay,
Yeah,
so I'm sorry, let me back up. So 5 of the 7, at least 5 of the 7 of us have to vote in favor of calling question now as opposed to discussing, and then we'll have the vote. Okay, I hope that's clear. Okay, so vote to call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, so we're all good with calling question. Okay, so, okay, step 2, this is where it counts. Okay, all in favor, say aye. And we have 6, all opposed say nay. Say nay. Okay, motion passes 6-1. Okay, thank you. And I will just make an editorial comment that my nay is mostly because I think the school district needed some wiggle room. They should have their autonomy at this point, but that's how council voted, so that's how it'll be. Okay, thank you. Next item, we're down to receive or act on council correspondence. Anybody want to start off? Okay, I can start off. A couple things, we'll take the low-hanging fruit first. The question about Calhan and the weighted voting, PPACG met last week. The attorney explained some of the legalities in executive session. The board directed her to share her legal thoughts with the attorneys for each of the cities. I believe Mr. Parker has received her comments. So we'll meet again in about another 3 weeks, and we'll go from there. Mr. Parker, would you like to speak to that?
Well, just briefly, full disclosure, I happen to represent almost everybody on the PPRTA board because I represent Calhan, Rama, Green Mountain Falls, and you. So I want to make sure I'm not giving advice that's a conflict of interest, but generally, her analysis is accurate in my opinion, and it's really a decision for Manitou Springs to make regarding how they want to address the weighted voting. So.
Talk in the mic.
Oh, I got to be so close to this thing. Okay, so full disclosure is that I'm the attorney for almost every entity that's a party to this. So I want to make sure that nobody thinks I'm providing conflicting advice for different entities, but basically I agree with the opinion of the attorney for PPRTA, and it's really up to the to Manitou Springs and the other entities whether or not to allow Callan to join and whether or not to require weighted voting. It's up to you all. So.
Okay, it seems like we should get a discounted rate for your fees.
Yeah.
It's a group rate, Jeff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I definitely I don't double charge for it. So
Okay.
you are.
Okay.
Right.
So-
Exactly.
So anyway, that's where we're at, and that question came up, and I know it was in at least the backs, if not the fronts of minds of people. Okay, well then the other things I did this week. Last Thursday, I went and physically inspected the Hiawatha Gardens building. Went in there. I asked permission from the contractor. I arranged to be down there. I took two associates with me. I inspected it. I felt that was an appropriate thing for me to do. It was within the context of my job as mayor. Apparently, a great many people didn't like that idea. They felt I needed to ask permission from a number of other individuals, and so I just want to call that to everybody's attention. If I had it to do over, I'd do it the same way. The only permission I think I needed was from the contractor. It's within, I think any member of city council should have felt that they were able to go down and actually look at the building. It's opened up now. The next plan, I believe the committee or the task force would want is to button it up, and that would obscure some of the ability to look at things. Again, didn't ask permission. I'm not asking forgiveness. That's what it is. Anybody else have anything?
I just want to say that I would hope that the mayor has made it very clear that he would not ask permission. I would hope that everybody else would go through the contracting officer before they contact a contractor directly. I just think it's beyond common courtesy. It's good practice. It's much better practice.
Judith?
So, two things. First of all, we signed a code of conduct, and item number 22 on the code of conduct suggests that when a resolution passes, that even if you're in the minority, that you respect the resolution. And we have a resolution 3120 that directing the Hiawatha Gardens Task Force with specifically finding out for the community whether or not the Hiawatha Gardens building was structurally sound using an engineer or engineers, and that has happened. So that was my first comment, just referring you to the code of conduct. Second of all, can you imagine if each one of us on council decided that we were going to go contact the contractor and bring our own people and get our information and bring that back to council, and you've got 7 people with their people? So I think that that's just a real can of worms that could be opened. I just have to tell you, I really personally feel if I had done that, I would have my head on a platter. So I just want to make sure that all of us are treated equally, and that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, I will cut to the chase. I will say that when I first got this pushback, I was furious. I don't very frequently get furious. I do think that's a responsible thing that I could do, or any member of City Council could do. I do not think that the Hiawatha Gardens Task Force has exclusive ownership of the property. Again, I'm not going to ask for forgiveness. I will mention, because tonight is good timing, that if anyone certainly wants to disagree with me on this or any other topic, they can get with Judy, pull out a petition for mayor, and get it filed by 5 o'clock on Monday, if that's one alternative you have. So, enough said. If there's nothing else, let's go on with the city administrator's report.
Some good news, we finally got the final permit from CDOT for the rear diagonal parking on Manitou Avenue, so we'll be working on that. Also, since things are slowing down, we are planning the striping. We're getting the bids for El Paso, which will include a 3-way stop at Old Man's Trail in El Paso, which is a dangerous area to pull out, and a 3-way stop at Garden of the Gods Place in El Paso. And on the street, mile-per-hour signs. And then we're also going to be striping the crosswalks at the shuttle, make them larger for traffic calming. And at the COG as well, that section, so we can slow down the cars into that pedestrian area, high traffic area. And we're going to stripe Bar and Cannon lots, since those stripes are basically all gone. So that's the plan in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Denise? Oh, Natalie, do you have a question for Roy?
Roy, I have a quick question. How far does that parking go? The diagonal, because I would love it to keep going, but I'm guessing that's
yeah.
it doesn't go that far.
East of City Hall to the chamber, somewhere there. It's going to be a pilot. I have to confirm if they've made that a little smaller, but that's kind of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Denise?
No comment, thank you.
Okay, last item's adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay, I guess we'll call that a second from Steve. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Got a lot done. You don't need to keep things. Oh, you'll get a few, I'm sure. gonna go home. My daughter leaves tomorrow morning for school. My wife is here driving the house, so I'm staying here. It's okay. We had a nice dinner last night.
No, I said that's what I'm saying. Because now, you know what, they can go, Big Mac, Big Mac, people want to sing them along. They want to do stuff. You know what I mean? And, you know, and Denise, I am so proud of you. For putting this man through it. I know it's tough. I know it's tough. But you did it. And you did it right. And that's why I wanted to publicly say thank you. Because, you know, I think